Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Welcome to this episode of the Murder Part. Tonight we'll be looking at the case of John Leonard Orr. I'll start by having my co-hosts introduce themselves. Jeff, how you doing?
Very good, very good. My name is Jeff Pincin, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor in the states of Delaware and Pennsylvania, and I specialize in the treatment of OCD and other anxiety disorders in private practice. And, if I wasn't a counselor, what I really wanted to do was be an attendance taker for arson investigator conferences. So people who attended, just check off that they're there and travel around the world and just do that. Turns out there's not a lot of those conferences, and nobody wants to pay you to do it. It felt kind of like a lost cause at some point. I think it's important. Somebody's got to know who's there, but there's just no money to be had. And it, as much as I wanted to do it as just a free will kind of thing, it wasn't working out. I couldn't support anything because I wasn't getting paid. So I had to settle for being a counselor.
As altruistic as that is, I think that you definitely need to get some paid some.
Yeah, that was my hope, but nobody was paying.
I mean, I guess it's the same job they could do with just a pen and a piece of paper, just handing around the room. But
that's what I kept hearing too, and I was furious. I mean, I paid a plane ticket to travel all the way here, and you're just going to say I can be replaced by a pen and paper?
Yeah, I mean, it's very minimizing of your role.
It is, really it is. So I had to settle.
It's a tough break.
You never know when that could be critically important, though. It's one of those things that just seems like at some point it could matter.
Somebody could really need to know some details, and I could have been there, but if you're not paying, I'm not going to be there. I'm putting my foot down, not happening. So I had to settle.
A tough break.
Yeah, thanks for the support.
It's rough. Sorry.
All right, so moving to Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. My name is Mike Smith, also a licensed professional counselor of mental health in the state of Delaware. My focus is in narrative therapy and geek therapy, and I'm a self-styled expert in all things geek. And if I hadn't become a counselor, at one point in my life, I really wanted to be a fingerprint analyzer. Like I wanted to, put those prints together, right? You find a print at the crime scene, and you've got a database, and you just put the prints together. But then I found out that TV lied to me. As it's wont to do, apparently. And it's not as simple as just taking the slide and putting it in a computer and pushing a button and then letting it run through the database. No, you actually have to take the fingerprint and put it under a magnifying glass and just another magnifying glass and compare ridges and points. Oh. And it's just boring. And I was like, man, I don't get to be the hero of the case, just going,
I solved it.
I solved it.
Right.
No, you actually have to do actual work. And I was just like, that's too much for me. Yeah.
So you had to become a counselor.
I had to become a counselor. Where it feels less like work.
A tough break, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah, another shattered dream. So let's move to John Orr. So this guy, this case really, at first glance, doesn't seem like much, right? It's like this guy that set fires, right? I mean, that's unusual, but we cover a lot of high-profile murder cases and disappearances and alien lizard humanoid type cases on the alien lizard humanoids. And you look at this and you're like, is this really that interesting? But then as you dig into this story, it's actually incredible. Mm-hmm. It's amazing that this actually happened. Like, this is a real story. And I first heard about this particular case a long time ago. I think it was on TV, like there's different specials about it. And I'm like, could that really be? Like, was there really a guy who was a firefighter or an arson investigator setting fires? Didn't think much of it. And then it came back up with this book, Fire Lover, which I guess has been out for a while. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's a pretty good book. I'm not really a fan of books on true crime, meaning like I don't think they're necessarily useful for converting into criticizing and reviewing for videos. Like, they're not as fact-driven, I feel like, as articles. But this one was pretty good. This one looked like it was pretty well researched, very comprehensive, and had some amazing stories about John Orr, things he did that just, I think, really build out his character nicely and allow us a good review of kind of what made him work. So let's take a look here at his history. Do you have a summary for us?
Yeah. So John Leonard Orr, he was born in April 26, 1949. Grew up in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles area is where we see the majority of these things that happen throughout the story. So a lot of details here. He was in the military. He had 4 different marriages throughout his life, but many different girlfriends and people that he was cheating on wives and girlfriends with. And so you see an image painted of very much like a womanizer, kind of, that was his constant focus throughout his life. His one important detail is that his mother, her name is Lee, or that's what they called her anyway. She left the family around 1964, but abruptly left. One day came home, and John was the first one to see the note she had left, that she had gone to live with this former lover in Missouri. So it paints a picture of the situation in his house and kind of what the parents were like. So yeah, he went into the Air Force at age 17, and he was married to his high school girlfriend, 1968, and went a couple of different places, but he was stationed in Spain. That was the first place that they had moved, and he was really interested his whole life in firefighting and being a police officer and things like that. So he really sensation-seeking, really wanted these kind of real high-energy kind of jobs, things like that. And so we'll go into more of the details as we talk about it. He was transferred a lot of times, or transferred a few times in the military, and a recurring theme that we see is he really didn't like anybody in authority in the military. That was a big problem he had with the military, and his supervisors in the military would recognize that as well, that it was a problem. He didn't perform well because, in part, he didn't do okay with authority and didn't want to listen to other people. Really, I want to do things my way, and that's how I'm going to do it, kind of an attitude. So we see that anger was a big problem for him as well throughout his life, outbursts, and again, just wanting to do things his way, even in the face of wives, girlfriends, in-laws, friends, everybody. Everybody recognized this anger that he had. But John just wanted to do things his way, and that's how he was planning to do them. So 1971, his daughter was born, name's Carrie, and his marriage was not in good shape at that time. So that was his first wife, Jody, that he was married to. And then 1973, his second daughter was born. Her name's Lori. And I'll note here that there was another book called Burned, Pyromania, Murder, and a Daughter's Nightmare. This book was written in part by his younger daughter, Lori. So that was a book that I had read. We were kind of trying to get different perspectives, from different people. So here we see that John applied to multiple fire and police departments in California, and he was turned down by a lot of them, really not even given the opportunity to advance in it by a lot of the departments. So he was given an opportunity by the Los Angeles Police Department, but they gave him the Rorschach test and the MMPI. So this was September 1972. Interestingly enough, the mental health portion was the only part that he did not do well on. This was the part that the clinician that assessed him said this was not a good fit based on the results of this. This is not something you should be doing. You should not be a police officer and in any kind of position like that. We'll go into more details about that. John would go on to find his own evaluation from somebody outside of that and present it to the LAPD and be like, hey, look, this guy says I'm all right, but they weren't budging. So they still said, no, this is not a good fit. We're not hiring you. You're not going to go through continue to go through the academy. He did end up getting hired eventually, though, by the Glendale Fire Department. Now, you would note that this was at the time the lowest paying fire department in Los Angeles County. He was accepted there in March of 1974. So this is, he fought fires in the military, but this is where we see him really get in somewhere that he can start to build up his career. Now, it was the lowest paying, but it still kind of got him what he wanted. He would do other jobs at the same time. He would work at Sears. He would work at, what was the other one?
7-Eleven.
7-Eleven, right. So a lot of different places.
Convenience store.
Right, convenience stores were a big thing for him. So he worked a lot of different jobs. He really wasn't content with really anything. And he would even say, too, that he was not content with his schedule as a firefighter. He had it in his mind, originally, I guess, that he was just going to fight fires all day. But it turns out, from his own words, that they really only fight fires about 25% of the time. 75% of the time, they're trying to prevent fires. So they're doing things to make sure fires are not going to happen, or try to. So he wasn't content with that. He really wanted this sensation. He wanted this high energy kind of things going on all the time.
As we talk about him later, preventing fires is not exactly his strong suit.
No, not at all. Right? Well, and so that's a good point too, is one of the jobs that he would do would be the person to go out and give citations for people who are not doing the right thing. So not cutting back like branches or things that might be prone to catching fire, especially in California. We know they're prone to wildfires out there. So he would go around doing that, and like you said, Mike, he was bad at it because he had this mentality: I want to be in charge. I want to show everyone how great I am, and he would go above and beyond. And things that weren't even related to fires, he would start to get people for them. He would kind of push into people's houses if they weren't doing the right thing. He would start these physical fights, and he was always trying to be kind of this police officer presence, but never actually had that role.
He would even call like brush removal services and pose as the person who lived on that property and have them come out to remove the brush and then have the bill sent to the people who lived there. It was
He was all over the place. Yeah. He was all over the place.
He needed to have that authority.
Yeah, that's a common theme that we see throughout his life is seeking to have that authority and show how great he is, even to the point, we'll see later, spoiler alert, even to the point of setting fires himself to show how great he is, how great firefighters are, how great of an investigator he could be, etc. So in the book, one thing I thought that was very noteworthy, and we'll get into why this is important, but in 1974 was the first time that his wife remembers seeing John with a pack of cigarettes. Now, John did not smoke, by his own admission, and his wife said that she never saw him smoke either. So she thought it was odd that he had a pack of cigarettes. So when she confronted him, he didn't get mad like he might normally. It was kind of, oh, I'm sorry that I had that. So it was a much different reaction than what she was used to. Now, that's important to note because the way that he would start fires is with a delayed incendiary device. Part of that device would be cigarette matches tied together with a rubber band, piece of paper over top of it. So for him to have a pack of cigarettes in his truck in 1974 is pretty significant. That might indicate maybe this is when he started setting fires, possibly. We don't know for sure. He was ultimately he's serving life sentences in part because of the fire setting. But he never admitted to any of it, and he still maintains that he didn't do any of those fires. He didn't commit any of those. So we don't know for sure, but that gives a pretty good indicator as to what might be happening around that time. So so it left his first wife the same way his mom had left their family, just left a note saying he was leaving and just up and left one day. So again, wasn't satisfied even with his first marriage and just, I got to get out of here. I'm stuck. I got to do something more. Constant theme for him. Things that I would see in this book from his daughter Lori's perspective was that she was abused by her stepfather, and John didn't do anything about it throughout the whole time she was being abused. And Lori believed in John's innocence throughout the trial, even testified, saying that he was innocent, he didn't deserve the death penalty. But as that went on, she started to do her own research and realized, you know what? I'm seeing all these pieces together now. I think he actually is guilty. So that was, of course, a very difficult thing for her, not only losing her father to jail, to prison, but also that whole process of, is he guilty? Is he not? And trying to, figure that out and living with that. So, he would get married a second time. There was a big theme here about sex and the kind of things that he liked to do during sex and with many different wives and girlfriends and everything. And I think this gives a pretty good indication about what was on his mind, what he was motivated by as well. And we can go into more detail about that. But I think there's I think there's a lot out there that helps us to get into John's mind and understand. We don't understand his motive, really, but we can kind of get a picture of the things that were important to him, not only with setting fires, but just in life in general. So he would climb the ranks. He'd be a firefighter, but then he would climb the ranks. He would make it up to an arson investigator, ultimately be the fire chief for the department. And I don't want to talk about too much because we'll go into the detail of it. But ultimately, by the late 80s, early 90s, people were starting to get suspicious of him because he was always at the right place at the right time. Minutes after the call would go out for the fire, John would be there. He'd be taking pictures of it. And there were instances where other investigators couldn't figure out what started the fire. John walks right in and was like, here's the incendiary device within seconds. And they're like, how does this guy do it? And then they started to piece together, unless he knows something we don't. So late 80s, early 90s, there was many people were thinking this. Some were actually investigating it. And a few things that made it possible for them to actually convict him of this was a fingerprint that they found, a partial fingerprint. Mike, could have been you.
Could have been me analyzing these things.
It's a partial fingerprint that they found on one of those yellow pieces of paper as part of the incendiary device. They had put a tracker on his car, and then he found that one. They put another one, and they tracked him to one of the fires before it was set. So that was, very suspicious. And then I think really what did it, though, the final kind of last straw, they had intentionally given the wrong directions to a fire. And so, of course, everyone else went to the place where the dispatch told him to go to. John went to the place where the fire actually was. And they're like, okay, all right, we see what's happening here. They had enough to actually arrest him. And of course, he gets convicted after that. So he's currently serving, I believe it's 4 life sentences. So he was, from the early 90s through to the late 90s, he was convicted of multiple things, multiple trials. So currently in prison and will be for the rest of his life, presumably. And last thing that I'll say is John had written a book that he claims is fiction. And in the book, the details of his real life mirror the details of the book pretty well to a kind of an eerie degree. So many, of course, see it as, this is pretty much his the way that he carried out all this fire setting. And it was used pretty heavily in the trial to kind of work towards a conviction and ultimately use those details to piece together what had actually happened with these fires. So, yeah, you're right, Dr. Grande. From the surface, looks like not a whole lot because it's like, well, he set fires and that's terrible. But there's so many details that we have been able to know through books and through his own manuscripts and all that. And he's not afraid to talk to the media as well, and that kind of didn't help him out. So, so the last thing is at the end of this video, we will any of the questions that were in the comments, we're going to take those questions and answer them. And again, if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. We read all the comments, and we'll consider which questions we'll be able to answer for the next video.
Very good, very good. So a word about the points of origin. That was his manuscript I thought was interesting. When they were describing the trial later on, the jury wasn't allowed to see the whole book because he had made all those different references to sex that were explicit.
Right.
And his defense argued, if they read that, he's done. Like, we might as well just pack it up and go home. So he had I presume the judge and the prosecution and the defense had to read what I presume is a terrible book, terrible manuscript, and redact like one word at a time.
Yeah.
And you think at some point the jury's going to figure out they're going to do like a Wheel of Fortune thing, right? Like they're going to figure out what's in that redacted area. And I think they did. What
I think was interesting about the manuscript was when some of the arson investigators who were investigating all these arsons got a hold of it, they started reading through it like, this is exactly what happened. Like, it wasn't like, well, there's a couple of similarities here. Like he wrote, like, this could be the plan book. Yeah. Like, Like if he wrote this beforehand, this is the plan, and this is carried out to fruition. Like it's everything, even things like that the arsonist probably would have been thinking at the time, was included in this manuscript, and the arson investigators were like, "This is a gold mine."
Yeah, it's kind of a diary more than a
Right.
work of fiction. Yeah. So one thing that the book missed, and I don't know if the book you read, Jeff, did a better job in this, but it didn't have a lot about his kind of childhood fantasy life, because I'm presuming he had one because he seemed very high in openness to experience. He was unusually creative for someone interested in police work and firefighting. Typically, they're lower in openness to experience, more traditional, whereas he had a lot of fantasy. Almost, I would say, a dual life. Like in the book, it was almost like he was chasing himself. Right? The two characters, presumably, the good guy was him, and the bad guy was him. Right? It was I forget the guy's name, the protagonist in the book. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that was him.
Well, from John Orr's perspective, who was the real protagonist and who was the real antagonist?
That's right.
That's
Who was
a
the
big
hero?
question. Like, who was the hero of that book?
Yeah.
Was it the investigator or was it the arsonist?
Well, obviously, I didn't read the other book, so I don't know if it did a better job, but things that it mentioned were he had a memory of like killing a skunk with a bow and arrow when he was younger. Him and his brothers, the one brother he got along with kind of well, the other brother didn't. After his mom left, it all kind of fell apart. But the only other thing I remember is that there was a firefighter that came in for a career day, and that's when he remembered getting hooked. And like, that's what I want to do, kind of thing. Other than that, I don't remember them talking anymore about his life younger than that.
Yeah, it might be because he's he's maintaining his innocence, so he doesn't want to reveal too much, or people are not thinking to ask him too much. I don't know, but that would be what's of great interest. They did cover kind of high school forward pretty well in Fire Lover, and I imagine in the other book from what you described. But so if we go back, I'll kind of pick up the chronology in some more detail. But again, his mother left. She came back to Los Angeles 3 years later. She never got back with his father. Moving to high school with career day, I guess it was a department captain in L.A. that said, you should go fight fires in the military. So that's what he did. He went in the Air Force on his 18th birthday. He shipped out. And he got transferred not too long after that to firefighting school. He married, and he went to Spain. He was stationed at the airport, but he was very disappointed that the planes didn't crash but twice.
Yeah, he only had 2 crashes. Like, he wanted to respond to these crashes and be involved in putting them front, but he's just really disappointed there were only 2 plane crashes this entire time there.
I don't know if you remember. Have you ever seen the show Air Disasters?
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite shows. But there was a very famous plane crash that I'd actually heard of before Air Disasters, where I forget what country it was from, but there was a plane flying into someplace in California. I think it was San Francisco, where the pilots just totally got disoriented.
It's like the entire crew got sick off of the fish.
That's a 1980.
Right.
Well, steak or fish? I remember I had lasagna.
Lasagna.
So I forget the exact cause of the accident, but they got disoriented. They somehow thought they were someplace they weren't, and they slammed into the runway, and one of the fire trucks ran over one of the people ejected from the plane.
Wow.
Ejected or escaped the fire, ran her over. Terrible. So, it's a dangerous, being a firefighter on an airport or anywhere, but an airport's pretty dangerous. Jet fuel burns vigorously.
Yeah. Very high temperatures.
And, you're often, dealing with life or death every time because the planes have people in them.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like unoccupied structures or wildfires or something, although those can be dangerous as well. So he was really going to like one of the highest action areas of a high action occupation.
Yeah. And he wanted in on that action and only got to see 2 plane crashes.
I'm surprised he got that many. Planes don't crash that often.
Surprised he didn't become a counselor with that disappointment.
Can you imagine this guy as a counselor?
Oh, wow.
He's got a lot to say, though. I'm sure that there's people who listen to him avidly. We see that with other people of this caliber, that they just gather a following for some reason, And I wonder, I didn't hear anything about it, but I wonder if that's any different with John, that maybe there are people that just love him for whatever reason.
Yeah, I don't know if he has. Does he have groupies?
I didn't hear about any,
Like
but I didn't look it up
Ramirez and-
specifically.
They call them firebugs.
Arsonist bugs.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, he very well might. I don't know if he really, it's weird to say it this way, but got the same credit as other killers. Even though he killed
right.
4 people and it was devastating and terrible, I don't think he did it in a way that seemed as intimate as serial killers.
I don't think he did.
So he was transferred to Montana in 70. Again, he was disappointed, only 1 fire. So then he asked to get out, and he was honorably discharged. So, as you mentioned, Jeff, he didn't like authority. This was a recurring theme through his entire career. No matter who the authority figure was, they were wrong, they didn't know what they were doing, and he really hated and loved, I guess you could say, the police. He hated everyone who was a police officer, but he loved the idea of being one himself.
Right.
Well, I think he mostly hated the police officers because he wasn't allowed to be one.
Right.
He thought he could do it better. And
Yeah. He didn't think they were smart or capable. He viewed them as like having no finesse. So he really kind of distinguished himself from them, but he wanted to be a police officer, which is something we see a lot with serial killers. They're very, like, they deride the police, but if you look in their history, they apply the police departments, things like that. So he got shot down by many police departments, most notably LAPD. You talked about the MMPI incident. That's the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. Now version 2, I believe, is available, 2R, something like
I
that.
think it's just 2R.
And this is one of those weird tests because, the truth of mental health testing in our field is it's terrible. That's the truth of it, right? I mean, the instrumentation that we use is not often not reliable or valid. That's why there's so much stress put on experience. You have to use your knowledge of the field, your knowledge of people to figure out what's going on. You can't depend on the instruments. The MMPI is supposed to be the exception, right? It's the gold standard, right? It's supposed to really tell you what's going on to a degree maybe even better than your intuition and training. However, in the research community, the MMPI is hotly debated, with major figures taking both sides of the issue. It's something that you don't see in mental health very often, but kind of fighting over the validity of different scales of this instrument.
I mean, it does incorporate certain scales that are supposed to be lie scales or validity scales.
Response distortion.
Supposed to be able to detect the response distortion, detect whether somebody's being defensive or lying or faking things. But the truth is, it's still 567 items of true-false self-report.
Right.
It relies on the person reporting their own.
Yeah, and anyone can get,
experiences.
a hold of this test. And one of the things you see is with people just like John, I guess he didn't do this, but there is actually, like if you look online, there is a fairly robust community of wannabe police officers, Secret Service agents, FBI, all these things, who share information about the MMPI. You can get it. I mean, we can buy it. It's not, it's not top secret. Now, they don't know how it's scored
It's
because
not cheap.
it's not cheap. No, they don't know how it's scored, so they have to do a little guessing. And some of them, I guess, have tried to figure out the scoring key. It's fairly complex. I mean, it takes training to administer the MMPI and understand it at that level. But some of them have tried to figure it out. And they kind of know like certain items that are loaded on response distortion to be like, no, stay away from that, or certain combinations. The biggest thing, of course, is consistency. That's one of the major ways that it catches you. Like 500 plus items, you're going to forget. If you lied, you're going to forget how you answered.
Unless you practice that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, you also have, I think, very liberal interpretation occurring. I think the truth is that it's just a piece of getting in as a police officer. So if you don't do great on it, but you don't look like a serial killer otherwise, they might let you in.
Which I think is why Jeff mentioned they also did the Rorschach test, which is, to me, laughable, because Rorschach is such a subjective test, has no validity or reliability, really, and it's all about the interpretation of the test giver to what the responses are for the test taker. And like, if I'm in a bad mood one day, I might say like, well, your stuff isn't consistent, terrible. And if I'm in a really good mood, I'm like, yeah, you did great on that test. Like, it really is that bad.
Yeah, the Rorschach is an old test, right? This goes back many years. It wasn't reliable or valid back then. And modern clinicians kind of reshaped it and be like, no, it's really good. It's got the ink blots. That's all it has. Obviously, if you look at it and you say, I see people burning or something, that's a red flag. But anyone can beat the Rorschach by simply saying that the ink blots look like beautiful butterflies.
They
and
look
trees.
like butterflies.
Ironically, they, as far as I know from what I've read, the clinician indicated that John had his responses to the Rorschach had something to do with sex, I believe. And so that seemed to confirm or help him kind of understand John and maybe like connect dots a little bit, maybe. Now, maybe it didn't mean anything, maybe it did, but to that clinician, it seemed, all right, well, he got these really scary kind of answers on the MMPI. Well, he kind of gave some scary answers too with the Rorschach. Okay, this seems to fit together. So it seems like it might have been at least a little bit meaningful for John to have done both of those at that time. Yeah,
the MMPI indicated he had schizoid personality, which is different than the official disorder. It's just the personality. Like there's schizotypal, schizoid, paranoid, all kinds of personalities. And it said that he was, indicated he was immature, indecisive, had problems with women and sex, and was irresponsible.
Now, the book that I read, with the way they describe it, they use those words as well, but it's called him irresponsible. According to a previous employer, he was a goof-off. It said that he had a high ego despite not accomplishing much. That's, that's a pretty big blow. Like, oh, you really think you did a lot, but you didn't. Being dependent on others, wanting recognition for himself, issues relating to others, was passive and was resentful. So he had great references. He would eventually get great references from past employers and co-workers. But the person who administered that test was not at all, didn't think very highly of John because of those results.
No, I think the employment history actually was the biggest thing that was the biggest red flag.
Right.
Yeah. I think a lot of it came from that employment history, like the results of the Rorschach inkblot tests. That usually relies on a lot of inter-rater reliability and like having multiple people deliver this to a person and then talking about what they see as the results. When you only got one person doing that, you don't have any inter-rater reliability. And the MMPI, again, has some liberal interpretation of what the results could be. So you just have one person's opinion, and then you get into the background check and the employment check and go, okay, there's a lot of history of things. And that's a lot more reliable, is looking at the history, absolutely much more reliable. Rorschach inkblot test, by the way, goes back to 1921.
Yeah, and it's still used today. I remember it was used in Delaware a while back. Now, some time ago, I think it's been used more recently, but there was a famous case. I can't remember the guy's name, but I think he was eventually hanged. So things didn't work out for him. Yeah. But at one point, the state, going after him, of course, it's automatic appeals of the death penalty. And the Rorschach was used, I think, by his defense, if I'm not mistaken, back in like the late 70s or something. So this is like, we make fun of these tests because they are humorous and ridiculous, but they have it's a real consequence. It's like misinformation.
Yeah.
Imagine if John had taken the house person tree. You familiar with that?
Oh, yeah.
The ultimate projective, right? Here's a blank piece of paper. Draw a house, a person, a tree. This is a real thing. I'm not making this up. This is mostly with kids, but I have seen it used with adults. Would have been like John with like a gas can. The house is burning. The tree is kindling.
The tree's on fire.
I don't see any problem with this.
All of the trees are on fire.
Can I join the LAPD
now? Interesting you mentioned hanging in Delaware. I think Delaware was the last state to actually use hanging as a method of execution prior to Delaware making execution illegal.
I think in the last case that occurred in Delaware, I'm not sure if it was the last hanging, I think it was, the judge actually gave the guy the choice of lethal injection or hanging, but he was sentenced to die by hanging, and the guy's like, it's morbid to offer that, and he went with the hanging. Now, of course, the way it works is they bring in engineers, right? They don't just, it's not like local Delaware officials. I'm sure they're very competent, but they're not the ones doing that. It's like people that they bring in to make sure that the body weight will snap the neck. Otherwise, it's strangulation. So it's had some mishaps in other states, and many, like prior to that, like 100, 150 years ago, hangings can go very, very bad.
Oh, that's actually really interesting. Billy Bailey was 1996. It's actually much sooner than much more recent than I thought. I thought it had been a little bit further back than that. But yeah, the last person hanged in the state of Delaware was Billy Bailey in 1996.
Yeah, that was the case I'm talking about where he was asked to choose. Yeah, it's interesting because firing squad is technically the least painful. So I find it curious that everybody sticks with the lethal injection like it's some type of gold standard. It makes very little sense. A firing squad is pretty much instant if somebody's hit in the right place. And it was used by the military for many, many years. Yeah, hanging seems just, all the death penalty, in my opinion, should be banned. But if you're going to do it fast. And hanging's not, it's fast, but it's thinking about that. Not that thinking about a firing squad would be pleasant, but just, there was a firing squad execution in, what was that guy's name? Ronald or Ronnie, a famous serial killer or killer who escaped from a courthouse. It was like a courthouse shootout, like out of the movies. And his name will come to me, but he was executed, to say murdered. He was executed by a firing squad. And I found it interesting in that case that all the people, getting in the death chamber were very concerned about safety. And I was thinking, well, yeah, if you're not, somebody could get killed in there, right?
So, somebody could get killed in there.
Whew. Safety should be.
You do want to make sure that if you're executing someone, you make sure that the right person is the one who gets killed instead of some random
Safety's
person.
the wrong word, right? Like, not for everybody.
Right. But you want to make sure that the guy who you're supposed to be killing is the person who dies and not somebody who's just doing their job.
You could see them being like passing out like bullet resistant vest, and the guy's like, I'll take one.
Can I have one of those?
Oh, you almost got me. You almost got me.
Good one.
Yeah, so I think for some of those, they actually give, I know for that one, they gave a dummy cartridge to one of the prison guards that was selected to shoot. And the military does this too.
Yeah, they want to make sure that nobody knows who has the actual round so that nobody can be pointed at as being like, oh, you're the one who killed this person. Like you got 7 people, 1 bullet, the rest are dummy rounds that all make a sound. But you can't tell.
Well, I think in that execution, all of them were live except one. It creates the same doubt. Like,
Sure.
I think if you have experience with the weapon, which they didn't, you would know. Like you could feel the resistance of a real projectile versus a piece of wax.
Depends on how much powder you put in it.
Yeah, if you get some time.
You can get the same recoil out of it if you put enough powder in.
Well, maybe they do. Maybe they adjust it or something for the resistance. But you can usually tell. But, maybe they didn't want to know. Who knows? They also made a commemorative coin for the execution.
Really?
Which I found very odd.
That is odd.
Like, good times. Remember this?
Remember this one.
Hey, remember we did that execution together?
Put it up on your mantle and tell your grandkids
Don't
about
put that in a vending machine. What are you doing?
Who would want to remember that?
Well, at least you got Doritos out of it.
I don't know who would want to remember that.
I don't know.
I don't even think the people, I don't think the people who did the firing would want to remember that. Unless there's people, I don't know.
They were all volunteers. They all chose to do it. No one's forced to do it.
They've done the same, like a similar thing with the electric chair. Like they put multiple switches up on the wall and have people pull them all at the same time. Only one of them is live, so nobody knows who's the one who does the thing. Multiple buttons for the lethal injection as well. Like that did not, making any culpability assuaged, so that people, especially the people who are pushing that button or pulling that switch or pulling that trigger, can have some deniability to themselves. Like, I'm not the one who killed it, somebody else did. It wasn't me. I have no way of knowing that it was me, because that guilt could be really bad, even if this person is a really, really bad person.
His name was Ronnie Lee Gardner. I just looked it up. And I think my video on him is actually on Patreon. I don't think it's released yet, but it's a fascinating case. The jailhouse escape, like weapon was planted for him and everything. It was somebody watched too many movies. And watching too many movies is good. Yeah, well.
So I was just thinking. I was thinking of that question of who would want to remember that, and it makes me think of people out there. Usually, people commenting on the internet for whatever. Of like, kind of back in my day, when people did something wrong, we killed them. Or back in my day, we had the death penalty and everyone was okay with it or whatever. So I wonder maybe if it's someone like that who would buy a commemorative coin. Well,
I think it was issued. They didn't have to buy them. They were issued to the people who participated.
Oh, okay. I gotcha. Well, I wonder if there's people out there who are like, we used to kill people when they did something wrong and we were okay with it. Everyone was fine with it. I wonder if that's the kind of person that like wants something to commemorate that, remember it. I don't know.
People in Texas are still like that.
Yeah, I'm sure people all over the world, all over the country. Yeah,
I mean, in some of the more like Delaware is a fairly liberal state, so we've gotten rid of the death penalty. Although there have been attempts to bring it back very recently, as recently as 2017, they were trying to introduce a bill into the state Congress to reinstitute the death penalty, to bring it back.
Yeah,
but.
There's no scientific reason to bring it back.
No,
right? It doesn't do anything.
It doesn't. To me, I've always thought like the death penalty, if we have it, should be reserved for people who have demonstrated they're repeatedly going to do violent actions, like people who have escaped from prison multiple times and killed multiple people in those attempts. People like Gary Ridgway killed 70-some people. And that's not a person we can allow to be free. And people who are continuing those kinds of things in prison, killing people in prison, like it's keeping people safe, keeping them sequestered anywhere. So, unless you're in a supermax where you're, sequestered away from everybody, but there are still some instances where people in supermax are able to injure or kill guards. That's a kind of person I'm like, they're too dangerous to even be left on their own in a small cell.
You think of somebody like Carl Panzram, right, who escaped many, many times. He was eventually hanged. It was an older case, but he just escaped and offended. That was his whole life. And he did it pretty easily, it seemed like. Of course, this was years ago. But yeah, somebody like Carl Panzram, again, I'm against the death penalty even there, but you could make an argument, I think.
I think there's an argument to be made for the kind of, but vast majority of people who are put on death row are for like single or circumstantial or circumstance-based scenarios. And it's like, well, we're going to kill you for killing your wife. How many times are you going to do that? Well, just the once.
Imagine if they had executed somebody like Michael Morton.
Yeah.
Right.
That was Texas, so they were itching too. Yeah. So either way, we see that mental health testing is not great in forensic applications, like you're trying to figure out if somebody's criminal or not. It does an okay job for regular practice of counselors, right? So I wouldn't want to say I wouldn't want people to be afraid of instruments in normal circumstances. You go in and take a depression screening or anxiety screening. Those work okay. If you're trying to beat it, you can beat it simply by answering questions that make you look more depressed and anxious. If you want to show positive.
But what that's going to get you is more sessions with your counselor.
Yeah, it doesn't pay to deceive with that or malinger, but there is a lot of motive for people who want to become police, and again, the FBI and everything else. And it's a real problem. And the people that are contracted to make these decisions, like mental health professionals, different types, they're highly inconsistent across interviewees. Like it's comical how easy it is to get in as a bad police officer.
Yeah, but they really want to use the polygraph too. Like through all of that, we were talking about the Rorschach test. Like I think the Rorschach test is great as long as it's just decorative on the wall of my office, which we do have in my office. We've got paintings that are, Rorschach inkblots on, up on the wall. And I think they're great for that. And we've had some conversations with clients about it. And they're like, "Did you ever use that test?" I'm like, "No, I just like looking at them."
Because I see a dragon.
I see
How did you know I said dragons in those things?
I see someone setting a fire up there. Well, maybe that's a further conversation then.
One of them looks like a video game character to me. It's just like it is. But one of the most famous ones. If you go to the Wikipedia page, there's an example of the inkblot test, and it's like I see a cartoon wolf. Mm-hmm. That's me, cartoon wolf.
It's only a problem if you see the wolf setting fires.
Interestingly,
hey, is he setting fire?
He's thinking about it.
Interestingly, we would see that he got a second opinion, that John got a second opinion from another mental health professional outside of the LAPD.
Who he paid privately.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And
gee, I wonder why he got the favorable result that he wanted.
Yeah.
Amazingly.
Well, and he would say that, yeah, his score is high for, what did they call it there? What they call it in the test that he got the high score? The schizoid rating was high. Yeah, sure, it's high, but all the other scores are fine. I think he's all right. I wouldn't exclude him, from the possibilities for this score. And so to the inconsistency point, and he paid him, so maybe that played a role in it. But to the inconsistency point, the person within the LAPD probably had pretty good reason to be very exclusatory and be like, no, I'm going to set a pretty high bar for who's allowed to be in here because he knows the stakes are pretty high. Somebody outside of that might not have even known why John was taking this test, potentially. And so maybe he was like, okay, well, you're just taking this and the results don't really matter too much or something. Who knows? Although maybe that clinician did have to send the results there. I don't know. But
they had since they made that evaluation that, yes, this is really high over here, but it shouldn't exclude him from becoming a police officer. Right. Pretty sure they knew what they were doing there. Which I think that if you were going to get realistic good results, you wouldn't tell the clinician doing the testing what you were using them for
to not sway their results, right? Mm. Yeah,
but I think that's what I think that's what John did. Like he really was going out of his way to try and get in. Mm-hmm. And despite how we've talked about how difficult it is to find reliable and valid tests, I think the LAPD made the right choice.
Yeah, well, I guess just fortunate his work history was poor. Mm-hmm. So that gave him something concrete to latch on to reject him.
The book I read also said that he had that he had an IQ of 132, according to that second opinion guy that he got it from.
On which test?
Well, yeah, that's the question, isn't it? But
probably a waste.
But I don't know that I really heard a lot about John's intellect or mental capability throughout all the research that I did. And like we've talked about it before, does the 132 really mean anything? Does that indicative?
That's a pretty impressive score.
It's a high score.
I mean, he's exceptionally intelligent. If he's that's.
And I would argue that John Orr actually is very intelligent. Mm-hmm. I mean, he did become he was training people, mm-hmm. and when he set his mind to learn something, he learned everything he could about it.
Yeah.
He wrote more than just the one manuscript. Mm-hmm. He wrote other things. Mm-hmm. He was at least competent enough to be published at least once. And he got away with this for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like many criminals, the intelligence is separate from the criminality, right? He was intelligent, but impulsive and wanted to gratify himself. So he ran into problems, like his narcissism got the best of him, but he was very bright. That's over 2 standard deviations above the mean. Mm-hmm. No question there. I mean, if it was like, somebody's trying to argue if he's like 105 and somebody's trying to argue he's average, okay, a third of a standard deviation, but 2 above, he was pretty bright. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no question. And I think it's reflected in his versatility. 7-Eleven clerk, Sears employee, firefighter, book writer, or whatever that was, a trainer eventually, investigator, amateur cop or volunteer cop or whatever it is, wannabe cop.
I would imagine that as an investigator, sure, he probably made a lot of his career as an investigator solving his own crimes. but he obviously also did other investigations that weren't him, and he managed to get convictions. Mm-hmm. And provide evidence, and he would testify in court and things like that because he was an investigator.
He was very motivated,
very good at what he did. So I would say yes, he's very intelligent.
So we see that after getting into the Glendale Fire Department, as you mentioned, a low-paying, kind of like you want to be a firefighter, you stay away from Glendale. Then eventually, you walk up with the application. All right, I guess.
Fine, I'll do it.
Fine. It's anything to get in, get my foot in the door.
And eventually, I think it was a union that boosted the pay. So he ended up doing really well later. But at that time, he didn't like the money and he was bored. He was bored with the job. That brought him to 7-Eleven. And he got very excited one day when he caught a shoplifter.
I mean, to be fair to Glendale, it's better than how it's set up in Delaware currently. Like, if you want to be a firefighter, you started as a volunteer. Mm-hmm. There are very few paid positions for firefighters in the state. You volunteer, you get trained, you go through all the training stuff, you learn how to fight fires, you respond to enough fires, and then eventually, if a spot opens up, you can apply after you're already past your probationary period.
I think in Wilmington they're paid though, right?
Yeah,
in the city, right?
That's where the paid positions are, but they're very coveted because most of the rest of the state is just volunteer.
Yeah. It's an interesting job, and it does attract, I think, people with a similar mindset as to police. It's sensation seeking, but yeah, it's a much different route than law enforcement, where you would go in and you think you're going to get paid. But in firefighting, not always. I think there was an incident. So I think where we live here, in this area here, it's Christiana Fire Department. Mm-hmm. And there was an incident some years ago, a ways back, where a few of the volunteers were setting fires.
Yeah.
So it's actually a widespread problem. I was reading up on this after reading this book. I was shocked. There was a huge report that was out basically saying that we don't know how to catch these guys.
Yeah.
I think that it is a fairly common thing for people who are in fire departments to also be arsonists. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying everyone in fire departments. It's actually a very, very low percentage of firefighters do it. But the fact that almost every fire department has had at least one is an issue. John Orr just happens to be one of the most successful ones as far as how long he did it, how many fires he set. And one of the estimates was 2,000.
Yeah, he got promoted up to such a high position. Mm-hmm. I think that really helped him. So he was diligent. Like, he took all the tests, and like, it wasn't handed to him. Like, he worked for it, and he was highly motivated to do that.
There's a lot of, to your point, Dr. Grande, if they don't know how to catch them, there's a lot of reasons why they wouldn't be looking for something like that, right? Because at least in Delaware and probably many other states, a lot of them are volunteers, so they're doing a really high stakes job. Why would somebody try to undercut their ability or kind of investigate them and say like, well, what you're doing, we're not really sure if it's right or not. They're a volunteer firefighter, or they're a firefighter, and that's a really tough job, really noteworthy job. So, okay. And they're probably really good at hiding it too. If they're fighting fires, they know the ins and outs and they understand the science behind that potentially. And I had also read in this book that a lot of them might do it because maybe it's a slow season for them, and maybe they get paid hourly, or maybe they get certain benefits, with how many fires they fight or something. So they'll set their own to make more money or to get more recognition or whatever it might be. So I can understand. I can understand how someone's mindset goes there. Like, well, I benefit from these fires, so why don't I just start fires? Obviously, it's a bad thing to do, but for somebody who probably doesn't get paid a lot to begin with, somebody who wants to just get that sensation, get the thrill seeking, it's an unfortunate thing that they have to deal with already low pay and potentially not a good media image even, that like, so I don't know, it seems like a really difficult thing from the top to try to investigate someone and give some kind of doubt to their credibility or to what they're actually doing.
Well, that's the same reason police don't investigate well against the police.
Right. They don't want to investigate their own. And that's got to be a really tough thing to navigate.
Plus, most firehouses become very close-linked, close-knit. When you work in a shift, some fire departments do 24-hour shifts, others do 12-hour shifts, and you're there at that place for 12 or 24 hours with the same people every time you work. You get really close, and a lot of the busier ones have started instituting like incident debriefs right after the fact, psychological debriefs, where they kind of break down what just happened. which is one of the best ways of handling trauma. And arguably, running into a fire is traumatic.
Mm-hmm. Even once.
Yeah.
You'd be traumatized one time.
So, and it's one of the surprising things to me when I was in grad school, I was focusing primarily on firefighters, police officers, emergency responders of all kinds. In all of my literature review for like every paper I wrote was PTSD. And one of the interesting things I found was that of the 4 major professions involved in emergency response, police, firefighters, EMTs, and hospital trauma staff, firefighters are the one with the lowest degree of probability for PTSD. The rates of PTSD in some firehouses as low as 8% of the population. In some busier firehouses, it's as high as about 20%. But that's actually still lower than police departments, where in not busy police departments, you have 25%.
Wow.
And in hospitals, 28% amongst nurses.
Wow. And firefighting is certainly the most dangerous technically of all those professions.
Yeah. But because they have a cohesive group unit and they have all social supports that are stronger for people who've gone through it, they basically have group therapy built into the process of doing it. And those that institute immediate debriefs afterwards end up being healthier for it, mentally at least.
They also get a lot of time in the firehouse where I know they train and stuff when they're there. Like there's like a school kind of training and then they do physical training. But there is a lot of time where they kind of hang out. And I wonder if that's actually a good idea because they can play like pool and ping pong and all things they have in the firehouses, especially like on the overnights.
Yeah.
So maybe that helps them just to relax with each other and kind of bond. Whereas police are always they're always on their shift. If they're there, police station, they're working. They don't sleep there.
Right.
So.
And in Delaware, at least, the police officers ride their own cars by themselves. Right. They might have a partner, but their partner's riding in their own car, and they just respond to the same place if they get a call.
Some get a dog.
Some get a dog.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's why they all, we talked about this before, I wonder if that's why they congregate around an incident. So you might get 5 cars for something. You're like, I don't think you need 5 cars there. Maybe they're just looking to hang out. They don't get enough time with each other.
No, they don't get enough time with each other. Right. They really don't.
Yeah. Yeah, they probably are. I mean, they also park their cars the opposite direction so they can talk. And that's been epidemic. What bothers me is they leave the engines running. It's like, those are my tax dollars, man. Like, seriously?
So a buddy of mine used to work security at a place, and they had just built a 3-tiered parking garage thing, and it was gated off so that only employees could go in. And the police officers, when it rained, police officers would pull up, hit the button, and be like, "We're here to check the garage." And of course, they're police officers, so he'd just be like, "Okay," push the button, bzzz. And 5 minutes later, 3 or 4 more cars would come in, so they could sit in the garage and stand out in the open, not getting rained on. Waiting for calls to come in, 2:00 in the morning. They're just congregating in the parking garage just because it was dry there.
I'll accept it with engines off.
Yeah, that's certainly better. Yeah. Although it's still a false pretense to get in.
Yeah, that was still private property.
It's kind of trespassing now that you really back up and think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So John Orr took this job at 7-Eleven, caught a shoplifter. Then he wanted to go work at Sears because they had a robust security program. He
got such a rush off of catching that shoplifter. He started throwing himself into learning more about how shoplifters shoplift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he overcommitted. But when he got to Sears, at first they said, well, pretty much everybody here is a Glendale cop. All their security was, so they didn't like him, right? So, because he was already labeled as a busybody. But he managed to get in eventually and even got a carry permit, which is hard to do. Back then it was hard to do in California. There was one incident in particular where he, I don't remember exactly from the book, Fire Lover, but a Jeep or something, he was chasing a shoplifter and they got in a Jeep or a truck and backed him over or ran into him or almost ran into him, and he pulled his gun. And the guy wouldn't stop. And he didn't have the guts to shoot him, which is a good thing, because he shouldn't have shot him. He just let him go. But another, an off-duty cop, I think, or off-duty cop or somebody happened to be there, and he pulled his gun and the guy immediately surrendered. And he's like, I don't get any respect. It was a Rodney Dangerfield moment.
And no respect at all.
What I had read in this book was the guy was trying to hotwire the car. I want to say it was a Mustang, but I might be wrong on that. But he was trying to hotwire the car.
Oh yeah, I think it was a Mustang. Yeah.
He was trying to hotwire the car. John noticed it, I guess, and drew the gun and all that. And the guy I think it was a direct quote from John, said that he the guy hit him with the front quarter panel, front bumper of the car, and John, from his own, I think it was from his book, allowed himself to be moved by the car, which is like a weird way of saying I got hit by the car and it pushed me, but that was like very much a John way of making himself look better. Like, I allowed it to happen.
I let physics take its course and move me out of the way. I made that decision. It was a conscious choice to allow physics to move me. Otherwise, I'd have stayed exactly where I was.
I had to push the car myself.
He became one with the car.
Right.
Yeah. It was a mind meld.
Superman could say that honestly, but John Orr is not Superman.
No.
Yeah, so I think that was kind of telling that he was risk taking, but there was still something in him where he didn't want to shoot that guy because he was afraid of the consequences. He thought about his own authority in that moment, but at the same time, he could have shot him, like not legally, but he was thinking about pointing the trigger, and that's kind of scary. It was a car theft, not a murder in progress. And really, John put himself in a dangerous spot because that wasn't a shoplifter, I guess, right? You're saying stealing the car.
As far as I know, there may have been shoplifting involved, but based on John's MO for a lot of these things, he probably observing the parking lot at all times, if it was not a lot going on in the store, and would jump into action at any wrongdoing.
Well, if we go by his later MO, he probably would have paid the guy to try and steal the car and then stepped out in front, tried to stop him.
Or set it on fire and then tried to investigate it or something.
So after this incident and the concealed carry permit, we see the police really start deriding John, right? Like it gets out of control. They call him Inspector Clouseau. We talked about this. Peter Sellers famously played Inspector Clouseau. Great actor. He had depression. Really amazing story. But there was a lot of Pink Panther movies. It was a popular character. And of course, Inspector Clouseau was not competent, right? That was the whole thing. I think, is it Steve Martin played Inspector later? Yeah. I did a video on Norm Macdonald, the comedian who recently died on SNL. And he had a lot of opinions about comedy and dramatic acting. And he said that Steve Martin should have never become an actor. He should have stayed with stand-up, which is where he started. And I started thinking about the Pink Panther. And I'm like, yeah, you have a point. Not a great actor. Funny sometimes, but like in Parenthood, he was good, I thought. But in other movies, not so much. So maybe Norm was onto something there. So John continued to be bored, so he's transferred to Hill Patrol, which is not something we'd see in Delaware, but in California, a lot of hills. There's dry brush.
We generally don't have a lot of hills in Delaware.
Right. There's Iron Hill.
There is Iron Hill,
but it shouldn't burn because it's iron.
Yeah. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, Mount Ebright, which is the tallest point in Delaware.
Yeah, we don't have Hill Patrol.
We don't have a lot of hills.
But you go to these vacant lots, you see brush that's out of control, you issue citations. It's not a job that would require a firearm or flashing lights or really anything like that. But John made it into an adventure, and according to the book, there was an incident where he chased somebody in his truck. I picture it's like an F-250. I don't know what it was, but like a 1-ton pickup with these red lights on top. It was yellow, clearly a fire-esque vehicle.
Yeah,
and he has the same radio as the police, and he's calling them as he's driving, saying, I'm following, but I'm not pursuing. And they could hear his siren screaming through the traffic lights, and like, sure, we'll put that down. You're just following aggressively.
I'm aggressively following this person. I'm not in pursuit. Just trying to keep my eyes on this person. And They're doing some crazy stuff. I don't know who they're running from.
But I'm definitely not in pursuit.
Definitely
Don't get the wrong idea here.
Yeah, so John applies, he becomes an arson investigator. He takes the MMPI again.
What was interesting, though, like he applied for the arson investigation job, and there were other people who applied for it, or not a lot of other people applied for it as well, but he at one point pulled his application. And he was just fed up with with the way some things were going. It was the incident with the because he was on Hill Patrol, he gave a citation to a guy who knew the Glendale mayor, and the guy went to the Glendale mayor was like, "Can you get rid of this?" So he was pressured to not just like take back the citation, but to apologize to this guy, and that really pissed him off.
Yeah.
So it ticked him off a lot. So he pulled his application back, and he was getting ready to quit and move on to something else. Eventually, his fire captain would be like, "Look, you're really good at the investigation side of things. Would you please consider putting your application back in?" And I think that was what got him. Was the fact that his captain asked him and said, and kind of fluffed him up a little bit and said, like, "You're a really good fit for this. Please do it." So he's like, "Yes, okay, fine." He got some of that recognition that he was looking for.
The way it was described in this other book was a little bit different. The same build up to it, where it was this case, he forced his way into the house, if I remember correctly. There was this, whatever the citation was, and there was a prior incident, and the woman that answered the door was like, "I know who you are. You did this to this other guy, and I'm not accepting your citation." So yeah, knew the mayor, and his supervisor would say, like, "You don't really have the finesse to deal with these things. You got to deal with these." John was very much nobody's above the law. But his supervisors were like, "Well, listen, these people are big in society and they have a lot of sway in what happens, etc. So you got to deal with them a little bit different." John wasn't having it. So the way it was described in this other book was he took his name out of the running for it, went camping or something like that for a day or maybe 2 days, something like that. And he had a friend of his in mind, was like, "Well, at least this guy's still in the running for it." But then he thought about it a little bit more. He was like, "Wait a minute. Nope. I got to get the recognition here." Like, he didn't, maybe he thought that, but he thought about the competition between him and a friend, and I can't let this friend have it. So he put his name back in. They didn't mention anything in that book about anybody asking him, to put his name back in, but the result was the same. He put his name back in and was, of course, the first arson investigator it was for Glendale at that point still, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the understanding I had from different sources was that he was asked to put his name back.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so he gets paired with an actual police officer. Now, John carried a few different guns, right? I think it was a .357 Magnum revolver and a .380 automatic and an ankle holster. So he believed that this police detective did not like him, put him down as just a firefighter. And apparently, as I understand it, the police officer did make him leave his guns if he was going on a fire truck, because no one in, I guess at that time in California, could ride in a fire truck with a gun, no matter who you were. It was the law.
Company policy as well. Oh, yeah, company policy as well, I think. Yeah,
so he would, on one occasion, he took his .357 Magnum away and put it in the trunk of his car and watched him get on the fire truck. He was humiliating him. So, I get maybe John was onto something, but it was probably his behavior that promoted that toxic relationship.
Well, John would have numerous partners over his career, and he was very hard on partners.
Yeah, although they did well, they caught a lot of arsonists.
Yeah.
This makes me think of the show Sledgehammer. I assume, from the 80s. Just the relationship with the gun. And now I only watched a few episodes of Sledgehammer.
It was a great show.
It did seem like a great show. But just the relationship with the gun of this is my most prized possession. I don't go anywhere without it. Trigger happy, kind of, ready to just pull it out at any point, even at totally inappropriate situations. And so obviously Sledgehammer was funny, but John Orr was like the embodiment of someone that just was ready to pull a gun out at any point and was just way too attached to it, literally, on him at all times. But a very real life case of someone who just really didn't have a reason to have a gun a lot of the time.
That reminded me of a show too. But it was The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. from the 1990s. That was a great show. Bruce Campbell as the main character. There was one of the bad guys in the show was a guy named Pete, and he had a gun. It was his gun. Like nobody touches his gun. And it was Pete's piece. Became a running gag throughout that. Like somebody grabbed the like the very first episode. The main character, played by Bruce Campbell, just grabs the guy's gun out of his hand, and his whole gang just like, "You touched Pete's piece! Nobody touches Pete's piece!" And whenever that character would come back, like it'd have the same kind of thing, like you thought he died at one point because somebody threw his piece into a pond, and he went diving in and just didn't come back up.
There was also characters in the Police Academy movies that were very fond of their...
Tackleberry.
Yeah.
Tackleberry loved his guns.
And he was like, he had the personality to match as well. He's just, ready to go at all times with his gun. Yeah.
It's like the question is, how did Tackleberry get into the Police Academy?
I think it was a 44 Magnum, right? Because you talked about how it could break an engine block. But in Sledgehammer, there's one particular episode of Sledgehammer called Witless, which was a parody of Witness with Harrison Ford. Which was a hysterical episode, and of course, Witness is a great movie, and particularly relevant to us here because we live near a substantial Amish population in Pennsylvania, and that's really what the movie was about. I mean, it was about a murder and stuff, Witness, but it was really about Amish culture, and some interesting philosophies about guns. Like they have a much different view of guns, than many other people. Yeah, Sledgehammer, great reference.
One thing I wanted to add in came from John's second wife, Sheila. They got, might have to look a little bit here to find it. They got married. Well, I don't know if they got married in 1975, but that's when they moved in together. So second wife, Sheila, in the book that I read,
they didn't get married initially.
Okay.
Like when they moved in together, it was supposed to be platonic.
That's right. And they said it lasts only 20 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever it was. Yeah.
Right. Like that's when, like, when he left his first wife and moved in with her, it's like, it's just a platonic thing.
Right. They were just friends and whatever. Yeah. So 1975, either way.
Until they got the door closed and then.
So in the book that I read, there was a lot of quotes from her about, we had mentioned about sex life and what kind of happened in the bedroom and what that was like for John. What kind of things he was interested in. So things that she said: tying her up, enacting assault fantasies, sexual assault fantasies. So things like he would have her keep old clothes so that he could rip them off and tie her up and things like that. Pulled a loaded gun on her. Later they would say it was a Russian roulette kind of thing. Like, wasn't sure where the bullet was at. Had a friend watch from their closet when they were in the bedroom. Sometimes would gag her. She would report that he was borderline abusive and would also hit on other women when he was around Sheila. So there was one instance where they were sitting on a couch at a party. John was in the middle of Sheila and a friend of hers, and Sheila's sitting right there within earshot, started hitting on this friend. And Sheila, of course, is mad and ended up like dumping hot liquid like coffee or something in his lap because she was mad at him. And there was another instance where they were in a car and he wanted to do something she didn't want to. Oh, no, that's what he got mad at her. He got mad at her when they were in this car. I forget for what. He started yelling and was about to start hitting her. She dumped what she reported scalding hot pizza on his lap and burned him to avoid him, keep him from doing this. She also learned that he had been seeing her half sister throughout their marriage. So his marriage to Sheila lasted a year, but there was a lot in that relationship, a lot of bad things in that relationship. But it gives an indication about what John's motivation was, maybe, or what, at very least, what he was interested in. And it was a lot of, from Sheila's perspective, at least at first, she was like, okay, well, maybe I'm just not into the same things he is. But of course, we have the benefit of hindsight. It's like, well, he also was into some really bad things, not only with the arson, of course, but with this stuff in the bedroom. And it's unfortunate that he got so many women to buy into this, to kind of be okay with like, all right, maybe it's a little bit different than what I'm okay with or used to, but really gives an indication that he was much more, I think, abusive than other people might realize.
Yeah, a lot of kind of vulnerable and grandiose narcissistic features. Yeah. Again, pretty common in serial killers. A lot of overlap here between his behavior and a serial killer, even though he was not one, technically. Although he could have been if he had, some other people had been killed in those fires. He certainly was dangerous enough. So then we moved to 1984. Now, the book the Fire Lover book made a big deal of this, like a chapter or most of a chapter dedicated to this. In 84 is an 18,000 square foot hardware store in South Pasadena. 4 people were killed in a fire that was set in that store. This will become important later on. And John was the only arson investigator who thought this was arson, which I find very odd considering it's believed he set the fire.
Every other arson investigator said it was electrical. Like, it had to have been electrical from where it started. And John was like, nope, it's arson. And I don't necessarily find that to be odd, because he wanted his work to be known. Mm-hmm.
He wanted credit. He was willing to risk his freedom for the credit.
I don't think he necessarily wanted to be like, hey, I'm the one who did it, but he wanted it to be, he didn't want a fire that he crafted and he created to be swept under as an accident. Mm.
The question is, where do you go from there, right? If you're investigating and they're like, oh, you know what? We think you're right. I mean, he did it, so it's going to eventually lead back to him, potentially. Seems like a big risk. At
the same time, it also, when it was confirmed that he was right, it also built up his status and was like, oh, how did he know this when nobody else did? In the book that I had read, they talked about I guess the person who was maybe the lead investigator on that, or the person who was kind of in charge of investigating that fire. And I think I'm right on the details on this, but it might be slightly off. But he was close to retirement or something along those lines, and was kind of just phoning it in at some point. And they said that he didn't even go into the building, or what was left of the building. Didn't even investigate, didn't even look for possible clues, and was just like, it was an accident, electrical, it was whatever, it was an accident. So, of course, that made John really mad, too. Like, this guy's not even going to look at my work, so to speak, and made him, if it had just been glossed over in some other way, I'm sure he would have still been mad, but the guy didn't even go in, and I'm sure that really set John off and really wanted his work to be recognized and his accomplishments. I'm sure he would think of it like that. So I think it was really just all about John trying to get his recognition and trying to get that status. And he fought that pretty hard too. Like, even though people were like, no, just drop it. It was an accident. It was an accident. This guy even said it was an accident, but John didn't drop it. And I mean, in the short term, it paid off because he was able to advance, probably in part because of that. Obviously, they were able to see more clues from that too, like the same incendiary device used in many different fires that was used there as well.
And that incendiary device would be very crucial clue, like that it was the exact same type of thing used in so many. That's why they know like why they suspect so many of them, because it was the same incendiary device, which was a cigarette with 3 matches wrapped around it, with some yellow ruled paper and a yellow rubber band, just all wrapped together. And that was the cigarette would have been lit and it would have smoldered down, which is something actually can't happen today. You can't use the same thing today. In the United States, the cigarettes have to be by law in almost every state what's called fire safe, which means like every like quarter of inch or so, there's like 2 or 3 extra layers of less porous paper in, so that when it gets to that point, it doesn't get any oxygen and will die off. And it can burn through if you're inhaling, you're pulling oxygen through, it'll burn through those bands of paper. But if it's just sitting, it tends to go out. The cigarettes back in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s didn't have those. Once they were lit, they just keep burning. And it's why they needed to be fire safe. The fire safe stuff needed to be made was because people would just fall asleep with a cigarette in their hand, and it would continue burning down, and then a big load of ember would fall on their clothes or on the bed, and poof, it would go up. A lot of people died that way. But this incendiary device would use that burning ember until it got down to the match heads, and those match heads would ignite, and that would create a bigger flame. But it would take 15 minutes or so for the cigarette to burn down to the point where it ignited the matches, which was great for a time delay thing. You can set it, put it down, and then walk away, and it's just going to smolder, making very little smoke until the matches go.
And leaving very little evidence behind.
Yeah.
Right? Because all those things will burn. The rubber band, the paper, the cigarette, and the matches would all burn up if the fire caught on, which it didn't always.
It didn't always, but most of the time when it caught, it was because of where it was put. They were usually put in places where there was a lot of polyurethane, or one of the things that the task force would be called was the pillow pyro task force, because a lot of times in things like yarn or craft stores or hardware stores, they would find it in amongst the pillows. They light it up and put it inside the pillows because those catch really quickly once there's an open flame. So that's where they would tend to be found.
Yeah, he was clever. It was a clever, very simplistic device that was effective more times than it was not.
Yeah.
But he understood what would burn and what wouldn't, and I think he was pretty careful about his placement in terms of like not getting seen, as evidenced later on by the many, many descriptions of him that were completely wrong.
Completely wrong.
Yes.
So then
one time he was described as being like a 95-year-old man. 95-year-old man with a cane and a peg leg or something like that, or some really like it was really out there. Like, really?
Yeah, he did a good job. He was a master of disguise, I guess.
He's also described as a 20-year-old dude. Like, like, oof, they got it. Like, he was really good at hiding who he was and when he was doing these things and where he was when he was doing them. And those incendiary devices, I think initially with the investigator, like, he would take a while before he got to them. Like, he'd be like, man, this seems like arson to me. And then like a couple of days or a couple of visits back there, he'd be like, Eureka, I found it. I found the thing. And then later on in some of the investigators described it as like, we're still just walking in after the fire's been put out. And John goes right over to where the incendiary device goes, I found it. Like, how did you know it was there? Like, there's no way you couldn't not. And that was really when people were really starting to look at him as like, huh.
Yeah. He was very obvious. Again, for being intelligent, that need for glory to be recognized was so powerful that it would take over.
But I think by that point he'd been getting away with it for long enough that it was just like, okay, nobody's going to suspect when I find the incendiary device, because I always find it. I always find it because I know where it is.
It's a big advantage. So then we moved to 1987. So 1984 was the big fire. 4 people died. In 1987, there was a conference for arson investigators in Fresno, California. And during that same time, not far from the conference, a series of fires and attempted fires occurred at retail stores. There was several. And, they knew that it was almost certainly one person who did it all.
Because it was the same incendiary device in every single instance when they found the incendiary device. It was the same one.
I think they were seeing a pattern with the retail stores as well, and it was the one section that he usually put them in, draperies or things like that as well. So it was a prevailing motive, or not motive, but a prevailing theme going on as well in many of them.
I think there was one. It was primarily things like the draperies or fabric sections of hardware stores or in craft stores specifically. And I think that somebody pointed out at one point that was one of his mother's favorite things to do, was go to craft stores, and she was a very crafty kind of person. So like,
Yeah.
that's just one of those little details that they're like, well, that makes sense with him. Like if he's really still like harboring grudge against his mom for leaving, it would make sense that he'd be targeting places like that.
Yeah. Another reason why it would have been interesting to know more about that childhood.
Yeah.
So then, 1989. We moved to 1989. There's another one of these conferences in Pacific Grove, California. And the same thing happened, except this time a little bit before. And leading up to the conference, and on the first day, there were numerous fires with the same MO.
It'd be interesting to know how many people were at those conferences, but apparently they weren't taking attendance.
I told you there's got to be somebody that needs to do this, right? Got to be. There's got to be a little bit of money in the budget, right?
I do imagine that those conferences aren't like, Comic-Con level of attendance. Like it's a conference. There's like 12 guys here.
It was a very specific
I think it was actually a little bit bigger than that because maybe 60 to 70 people at these conferences. Because at one point there was a list of names that was like 56 long, and people were like, "No, like we're not looking into that many people." But that would be later.
Yeah, they thought it was unusual, but they did think it was tied to the arson investigator conference in some way. They did suspect that, like maybe a person who was at both.
And then one of the incendiary devices was found mostly intact, because a worker at one of these stores had seen the fire starting and had grabbed a fire extinguisher and put it out. And most of it had burned down to the matches. The matches had caught, but the rest of it was still there. And the investigator who showed up to look at that managed to find that it had a fingerprint on it.
Mm-hmm. The paper, the yellow paper.
The yellow paper had a fingerprint on it.
Yeah. So that quick-thinking employee, brave enough to take on that fire instead of running away, could have broken the whole case. Probably did, actually.
Yeah.
Break the whole case wide open.
Well, at that point, they had a list of, I believe, 10 people who had attended both conferences as well, and they were able to ultimately kind of cross-reference that with the partial fingerprint and those 10 people on the list.
Well,
and
that would actually happen later, because once they got the fingerprint, the investigator was thinking like maybe it has something to do with these conferences, right. And he pulled the list of names for people who had been at both conferences, and it was like 56 names long. And he was like, "Can we run the fingerprint?" And they were like, "Well, we'll check the fingerprint against people who are on this list, and that's all as far as we're willing to go." And they got a fingerprint analyst to look at the fingerprints and go back and forth between them and all of those 56 names, and came back with nothing. So it's zero connection to any of those names. Mm-hmm. And John Orr's name was on that list.
Yeah, which actually this became a big issue at his trial, right? Because they concluded that the fingerprint was not his. And then they changed their story later on and said there was a 13-point match. So how did we get there? Right? Seems suspicious.
It was what it really came down to was an error in the analyst looking at the fingerprint. They didn't process the print properly when they were analyzing it. And so there were it's kind of like looking at it backwards versus forwards. And they were also not directly looking at all of the fingerprints from everyone. They were looking for like 7 points of comparison and didn't see them. And then when another analyst later on started looking closer, they started noticing many more points of comparison. Mm-hmm. But it should be noted that fingerprints are not as definitive evidence as the police and television would like us to believe. The statement that fingerprints are as unique as snowflakes actually has very little scientific backing. Mm-hmm. That was a statement made once in the late 1800s in one claim in one book, and people have just accepted it. But there's one interesting case of a person who was from, I believe he was from Idaho, who was charged and convicted in absentia of a murder in Spain because his fingerprints were found at the crime scene. But he'd never left the United States. And there's camera footage of him in Idaho at the time of the murder, but the fingerprints were there, so that's obviously evidence. It just shows that the fingerprints are not completely unique. But in this particular case, initially, the fingerprint was seen as not being John's, and at that point, other arson investigators were like, well, we don't want to investigate other arson investigators, so we didn't get any hit on this, leave it alone. And then it would continue later, more conferences, more fires. And then they would narrow it down eventually to 10 names of people who had been at multiple conferences.
Yeah, and they thought that when they saw his fingerprint that he must have investigated the incident, and he was sloppy with the evidence. So even there, it was helping him. His status was helping him.
And then they would later ask the investigator who brought that evidence, like, has anybody else touched this evidence? And he's like, no. I'm the only person who's had custody of this evidence other than the fingerprint analyst. And that's when they were like, oh, wow. It can't have been John mishandling the evidence if he never handled it.
Mm-hmm. So then we moved to December 1990 to March 1991. It appears that John just really, really cut loose during this time frame. Many fires in retail stores. 5 on one day. March 27. So this week we see the pillow pyro, right? The task force. They close in on the fingerprint. They realize it's him. And then they place him under surveillance. And he's driving a Crown Vic, a police-like vehicle that the department paid for. And they discover he discovers the tracking device.
Yeah.
But he never asked why he was being investigated, which was used against him majorly.
What was interesting about the tracking device that he discovered, he actually called the police about it. And they sent an officer out who was in part of the investigation into John, who said, this could be a bomb. I need you to take you over to the bomb range so we can try and dismantle it. And John, he went over to the bomb range. They took it off and left. And the guy's like, do you think he bought it? And they're like, we don't know. Like, they couldn't tell. Some of the investigators were like, he obviously knows. Like,
He knew.
Yeah, he knew. I mean, and I think that's one of the reasons why he escalated. Like, he knew they were watching him. He wanted to get as much flash and fanfare as possible.
They would ultimately, at least according to this book, they would say it was a prank ultimately, but John would later have some kind of a quote or something, and or somebody would reference it. It was in one of the manuscripts of his book that he sent out. He would reference. Here, let me read it because I wanted to read this one. So we talked about his book, the manuscript, the book that he
Points
wrote,
of origin,
right? And so he sent a manuscript to a literary agent, and he references this tracking device. My work is a fact-based novel of ongoing investigation here on the West Coast. A serial arsonist is setting fires throughout the West and is quite possibly a firefighter. The series has been going on for over 5 years, and I was even considered a suspect at one point. In early May of this year, I found a radio tracking device attached to my car in San Luis Obispo while I attended a training conference. Ironically, my protagonist experiences the same situation. I had already written the chapter dealing with the protagonist being tailed before I found that I was being followed. By the way, I'm not the arsonist, and the investigation out here continues. My work is fictional. So John, he felt that he had to include that as like a, by the way, on his book.
Oh, yeah, no, I didn't do it. It's like, I'm not the guy.
In case you're getting any ideas, it wasn't me.
Don't call the police out here. Don't call the investigators and tell them I did it. Because I didn't do it.
Yeah, he was pretty obvious. So I think it's important to mention here, he got promoted to captain.
He did?
Yeah, before this. So he was making good money, had a Crown Vic, all the overtime he wanted.
He bought himself a brand new SUV as well. Like,
he was doing well. Like, there was no financial reason.
Yeah.
He didn't really have any financial motive anyway. He didn't make money from these fires. He spent money on cigarettes and matches and...
Yeah, didn't smoke, but was buying cigarettes.
So the police arrested him on December 4, 1991. He had cigarettes and matches. I think the paper as well, right, on his person.
Yeah.
Did not look good for him. He also had 2 guns on his person.
I don't think he was buying matches so much as buying the cigarette. Because at the time, he bought cigarettes. They had matches on on the counter. So many Wawas had like fish bowls with just packs of matches. You didn't even have to pay for them. Just reach in, grab a pack, and go.
Yeah. It didn't help his case, though, with all those cigarettes.
No. No. He didn't smoke, but he had packs of cigarettes on him.
So he had a complex road through the court system. We see that in 1992, he was tried, found guilty of just 3 counts. That's serious, but not life in prison. Not guilty of 2. He was sentenced to 10 years to run consecutively, so 30 years in prison. But then he would plead guilty in 1993 to 3 more counts, and somehow this led to a plea deal where he would be out in 2002. Because, 30 years isn't really 30 years, so they figured, well, at least get him. So 02 will close 3 more arsons. But then, before he was released from federal prison, he was indicted by the state of California.
And he lamented that plea deal as well. Like it was all part of him pleading guilty to those ones was just to be able to reduce the amount of time he was going to spend in prison, and he didn't really want to, as he has still maintained his innocence. And things.
He still does. Yeah,
he still does to this day. I don't buy it, but
even his defense, I mean, they made it pretty clear that they thought he did it. But we see that in 1994, he's charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, 21 counts. He's convicted of 20 and the murders, which, of course, that's the big deal. And that was 4 concurrent life sentences, but then 21 more years after he's dead, I guess. He has to come back.
After he's dead for the 4th time, 21 more years.
Well, it's concurrent, so he just has to do...
Right.
Yeah.
Live
it's
4
not like,
different ways at the same
right.
time.
It's not like the consecutive. Like there are other people who've gotten 17 consecutive life sentences. You die, you're reincarnated. We're going to get you from reincarnation and put you back in prison
Many times.
Yeah, Lori Vallow kind of situation. Maybe she's the consultant. Like, hey, how many times do people live? Okay, all right. This is how
27.
Okay, well, this is how many times we'll get them.
If somebody lives 27 times, we can commit 25 murders, and we can still have 2 lifetimes. Right?
We're still good.
We're still good.
So on appeal, though, he did have a victory. His sentence was shortened by 9 years. So after he's dead, he comes back instead of 21 years, 12. Yeah. And he's good.
Hey, good to go.
I mean, it is. If they were trying him for every single fire that he started, they'd still be litigating that. They'd still be in court presenting evidence. Because like it was seriously the task force estimated over 2,000 fires started with the same device and same MO over the course of 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So in his defense with the murder case, like I mentioned, his attorneys pretty much, they didn't say he did it, but they pretty much said to the jury, well, you can believe he did all these arsons, but he didn't do that one in 1984 in that hardware store. Which that's where they were in terms of trying to defend him. And it's actually not a bad point because nothing really tied him concretely to that particular crime except he was taking pictures of the scene, I think. But I think, the jury looked at it and were like, what are the chances that there's some other copycat that came out and did that?
Right.
And copied prior to the majority of those as well. And I'm absolutely sure that wasn't the first fire he started.
No.
And not even the first fire he started that way. He was probably starting fires well before then. But especially some of the brush fires out in the hills that he was taking care of, that he was being called to, like he definitely set some of those so that people would call and then he could rush over and take care of them. And I think that might be where it started. But then he moved into other areas and it became more targeted.
Yeah. Well, occupied structures. I mean, he escalated to risking people's lives and eventually killing people. Well, if he stayed with the brush, that would have been less likely. Yeah. There was a case recently in California, I think it was in California I was reading about, where I think it was a Canadian woman, I'm not sure, had a campfire or something and set a huge wildfire. And now she's facing 20 years, something like a long sentence.
Yeah.
Just one thing like that. I mean,
it doesn't take much.
Yeah, she was also someplace she wasn't supposed to be, too. I think that got her in trouble.
I don't know. There was also the sex reveal party that ended up setting off a wildfire.
those are so. We should do an alien lizard about those. Those are so dangerous.
Oh yeah.
It's incredible. There's a plane that crashed in one, right? There was a cannon that exploded and injured, maybe killed and injured people. What are they doing?
I guess you got to get the news out there.
Well, I guess they figure a new human coming into the world, you got to take one out.
We're trying to balance the scales here. Just trying to balance the scales, make sure we don't overpopulate. Take out a couple before one comes in.
Oof.
So
this isn't a crowded restaurant.
We had talked about his book that John had written, Points of Origin, and there's a lot of similarities. Of course, we talked about similarities between what actually happened in the book and all that kind of stuff. One thing that got me from that was how much lengths he went to absolve himself of responsibility in the book. And one quote that I had read was, this is in reference to those 4 people who had died in that one fire. The deaths were blotted out of his mind. It wasn't his fault, just stupid people acting as stupid people do. And it's mind-blowing, right, to think that these people were stuck in a fire and it's their own stupid actions, one of which was a 2-year-old stupid actions of just being with their grandparent that got them killed, which is like just incredible, like that he would have this kind of mindset.
Right. And it is interesting that manuscript really was one of the things that convinced the prosecutors and investigators that they were really they had the right guy, because things like that. But I can understand to an extent where he kind of put that in and why he minimized that, because, well, one, it's killing people and starting fires, 2 very different things. And like in the years prior and the subsequent years after, like 7 years after that, so many fires set, no one else died. Thankfully, nobody else died. So years later, when he's writing this stuff, he's coming across to this, like, it really has to come across to him, because he wasn't just going to places that didn't have people in them. Like when he went into one of those craft stores, there were people there. He waited till there were people there, and set those fires. So I guess in his mind, it was like these people had to be really stupid, because if all these other fires everybody got out alive, these particular people had to have been really stupid.
Well, the more he did it, the more he justified that logic, right? Like he had more math, more data to support. They just weren't thinking. That's why they died. It's not my fault, or not the protagonist's fault.
Yeah. or the antagonist's fault. We're not sure. We're still not sure who's the.
Oh, right, yeah.
Who's the protagonist? Who's the antagonist in that book? Go ahead.
They had talked about that particular fire. I think it was Ole's or Ole, something like that.
Was it Ole?
Yeah, I think it was Ole in his manuscript, but it was like Haley's hardware store.
Right.
Like
it was different in the manuscript.
It was like Haley's hardware store in the real world, and in his book it was like Ole's, which that's not a big change.
So the real store, my understanding from what they said in the book was the fire code was such, so this was 2 different buildings or something that were joined, or there was a wall that was taken down or something. A doorway put up between the 2 buildings. So the fire code was such that there had to be a way to get between those 2 sections. But they got past it because they had this door that had some kind of a latch or something on it that if it got hot enough, this latch would burn up or would melt or something, and this fire door would come down. And I believe, as far as I can tell, that this is probably what killed those people, because the front door of that section wasn't accessible or something along those lines, so they couldn't get out through this other door to get to the other section, to get to the actual door, to get out of the building. So it was a pretty big problem. And I'm pretty sure there were lawsuits against that company because of that, because it was kind of allowed to have this not really appropriate fire management system, whatever they called it. So it was really unfortunate. I think there were people stuck there that they could have gotten out if this wasn't the case. And so, of course, John may or may not have known that, but still, they're being stupid, and this is what got them killed.
Yeah, he blamed them. It was Ole's home center.
Yeah.
On Fair Oaks Avenue.
I just mentioned that as well. I was about to say, like,
It must have been Haley's.
Must have been Haley's in the book.
Yeah.
But it was definitely a very similar name in the book, but not exactly the same because he was trying to fictionalize everything.
Right.
He was just changing the names. It was like an episode of Law and Order. The names have been changed, but
I don't think he changed 20%.
I don't think he did.
I think
So it was copyrighted.
Right, it was copyright infringement because he didn't change it 20%.
he's got to talk to the LuLaRoe people.
Yeah, he's got to talk
really
to
figure this out.
Yeah, LuLaRoe has got that all figured out.
In this same article in the LA Times that talks about Ole's home center, it says that he destroyed 67 homes in that spree from 1990 to 1991. 67 homes.
67.
Amazing. So yeah, I mean, he killed 4 people, absolutely, and that's terrible. He also caused destruction of property that was just unbelievable.
People's pets were killed in those fires too, like which is probably the worst thing in many people's opinions.
Oh yeah,
as way worse. I mean, especially if you look at Hollywood stuff, it's way worse to kill the dog than to kill a protagonist. Like, I may have told this story before, but Independence Day, they did that. They had to refilm sequences to make sure that everybody knew that the dog didn't die because it got panned so bad. Like, it is just a thing. Like, you don't kill the dog.
it's really a movie device.
Yeah.
Right. You see it repeatedly across many movies where they deliberately have a shot to show you the pet escapes.
Yeah.
Now, years ago in TV shows, they deliberately did that to show you that people would escape. Like something like the A-Team or whatever, there'd be a shot like of a car going over and you'd see the guy climbing out. Now it's like, just assume he died.
Yeah, he died.
It's not a dog. So
No. The dog that was in the back seat,
There's a shot of him.
There's a shot of the dog running across the road in the background, but the person who was driving, they're dead.
Yeah.
Whatever. People are expendable. Dogs are not.
what would happen if Star Trek away team sent down a dog?
A dog in a red shirt.
What happens? Immovable force and irresistible force, immovable
The
object?
irresistible force means the immovable object. Like, what happens? I don't know. How? I do not know.
Will the whole system just explode because no one's sure what's going to happen next?
It's possible. Just all of a sudden, everything stops.
That's the end of the franchise, right?
Everything just stops.
Somebody has to invent a time machine and go back and fix that thing. Don't send the dog down in the red shirt.
You guys should have known better.
That actually also extends a little bit to cats. And picking Star Trek, like it goes into Star Trek Generations. They destroyed the Enterprise D, like at the end of that movie. And there were so many people died in that. They show explosions going off in hallways, people being killed, and the whole saucer section just crashes into the ground. And
Data got the cat.
And at the very end, Data finds his cat and picks the cat up. And it's like, the cat survived this thing crashing, people just dead. There's 1,300 people on that ship, and I'm sure like 300 of them at least died, but Data's cat survived, and that's important.
And that's what's important. I remember,
and the thing is, I think that people would have been really upset if they hadn't shown that,
Yeah, that
because
was
there are a
important.
lot of fans who knew Data's got a cat. His name's Spot, and they would have been like, "Wait, what happened to Spot?" if they didn't show that. So they showed it, and Spot survived.
I saw that movie in the theater, and when Data yelled the expletive, when the whole audience went berserk. It was.
I love that movie. That's one of the best ones.
Is that the one with that's the one with William Shatner, though, right?
Yes, yeah.
And that's, I think,
That part is kind of
the bolts pulling out of the rock, and it's like we can't do a little better when was it like the bridge it was
the
coming out,
bridge fell and he was on it and it went rolling down, and
Patrick Stewart's all subtle with the rock. Finding the shield was not below the rocks. It's a waste. It was a waste of good actors. Well, Patrick Stewart's a good actor. William Shatner is he's rough little. I think, I don't know.
He was really great when he was younger. Like I think some of his earlier roles were really wonderful, and then he just got full of himself. And then so many parodies of his the pause acting.
Yeah, overacting.
The pause, which he actually doesn't do that much of in his earlier stuff. But when he does, it becomes really noticeable. And then people just parodied that so much that he just started doing it himself later on. And
like a trademark.
yeah, it became almost his trademark. And like, it's going to be, I'll be sad when they announce he died. And I actually had a scare the other day because I saw like just a notification on my phone. It said, William Shatner, and I'm like, wait, what? Don't tell me William Shatner died.
We're going to space, right?
And then, yeah, the headline was William Shatner to be launched into space. And I love the passive nature of that sentence because it sounds like he's not on board with this, but he's getting shot up there anyway.
You're going whether you like it or not.
You're going whether you like it or not.
This is how we preserve you. We send you up into space.
He's got to be close to 90 or 90. He's up there, right?
He is.
His age. Been around a long time. And I think Patrick Stewart's fairly advanced in age, too.
Yeah. 1931. Shatner was born in 31.
31. Wow. Yeah, so about 90.
Patrick Stewart, 1940, so he's 81.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but either way, Generations was a good movie. Overall, even though it had a weak thing with the little bridge at the end there.
Overall, it was a good movie, though. Yeah. And actually a fitting send-off for the captain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So the last area we'll look at here with John Orr, before we get to the comments, is the issue of pyromania. Again, pyro, it was assumed he was what's called a pyromaniac, which is someone who suffers from pyromania. I think one of his mental health assessments said something about pyromania, like with pyromanic tendencies or something like that. But I don't think he was ever diagnosed with pyromania. It was like, it's not a very common diagnosis, and I'm not sure the clinicians had the training and they felt comfortable with that. It didn't really matter, life prison, so. But, it's interesting. When you look at pyromania, someone who deliberately sets fires on more than one occasion, they have an affective response before the act, almost like sex, right? A fascination with fire, gratification when witnessing the fire. So again, that sexual reference. The fire setting is not done for monetary gain or to cover up a crime or anything like that, and it's not better explained by other disorders like antisocial personality disorder, conduct disorder, or a manic episode as part of bipolar. It doesn't really seem like someone who has pyromania.
No, it seems more like the antisocial. That's the way it expressed. That's the way it came in. And there were people who talked about, and in his manuscript, it's described as well some of the sexual gratification that he got while watching the fires. Mm-hmm. Like he would be self-manipulating while watching some of the fires that he set, and recording it on camera while he's doing so. And not sure whether that's actually was demonstrated that that's a thing, but it definitely was written into his manuscript as being a thing. And if he's changed only 5% of real life, because he didn't get to 20, we know that, then it's entirely possible that that's what he was doing, and which would indicate more of a paraphilic disorder.
Well, it could be
as far as that goes, but it could be like antisocial with a paraphilic, and
yeah, but it could be pyromania. I mean, he's getting that affective arousal before the act and the gratification during. But it seemed, in reading the book, I got the sense that he was fascinated with pyromania, but maybe didn't have it. It wasn't as clear that that he had it. But he didn't, think about it, he didn't actually get monetary gain or anything. So, I mean, it's possible, but we just don't know enough.
And who knows, maybe that was the 20% that he added into the manuscript was all that stuff. Like, because he was fascinated with pyromania, he would have known those features of pyromania. So maybe he added that into the character to try and make it different enough from himself that it wasn't the same.
He could have gotten some financial gain from it, though. Maybe not enough to make it a motive for it. But it talked about he had, at one of his positions, he had unlimited overtime. So if he's setting more fires, therefore working more, therefore potentially making more money off of it. Maybe not enough to be an actual motive. But it might have been something that crossed his mind at the very least.
Yeah.
And while not financial gain, he definitely was getting reputation fame.
Yeah, it was helping him.
It was definitely helping him because he, right, when he sets the fire and then walks right in and points out where the incendiary device is, he looks like a miracle worker. And all of these people are really impressed by him. There were a lot of people who were really impressed by how good an arson investigator he was. The investigator who actually found the fingerprint actually had been excited to attend one of those conferences because John Orr was going to be doing a talk there, and was really happy to be able to join a training run by John Orr.
Yeah.
Like prior to figuring out that, oh wow, he's the guy behind all of this. Like, he was really excited. So John was gaining reputation by being able to determine, hey, all these are arsons. We haven't caught the arsonist yet, but we know that that's arson because I figured it out.
Yeah, so he did get something from that. And interestingly, you look at those symptom criteria and you may think, well, I don't know, it does kind of seem like him, but only a very small percentage of arsonists are actually have pyromania. It's that rare. So we just would need more information to get an idea if there's an alignment with behavior. Again, it was mentioned in his diagnosis, but they didn't say like he had pyromania. It was like with pyromania. It's not even a thing. So
Right.
again, forensic, these guys that did the court stuff, especially back then, they were very sloppy with diagnosing.
Schizoid personality disorder with pyromaniac tendencies. Like, what is that?
Let's just make up stuff.
That's not a thing. That is not a thing, by the way. Like, I mean, yeah, there's bipolar disorder with psychosis is a thing. PTSD with hallucinations is a thing.
I don't know if we've talked about this before, but sometimes, especially among the PhD practitioners and like psychiatrists, there's this tendency for them to make up their own diagnosis when they're in court or anywhere. Like, I'm not going to follow some book.
Some book's not going to tell me what to do. I'll make up my own diagnosis.
Yeah, so
because it fits.
Pyromaniac is one of those things that we talked about this with OCD. It's kind of thrown around as a general term sometimes for someone who likes fire or something along those lines. So I'm thinking about when I was in Boy Scouts when I was younger. There'd be those kids that, everyone I guess was a little bit wild, but some kids would like just. When there's time to start a fire, they'd be like, oh, I'm going to start it. And, other kids inevitably be like, oh, you're a pyro. And for some, it was like a badge of honor. It was like, oh yeah, I have this, whatever. They think of me this certain way. And nobody actually meant, I don't think, like, wow, you've got a real problem. But it's another term that in some circles is just thrown out. Oh, you must be a pyro. You must be a whatever. And, much like we talked about with other areas, that can be a dangerous thing to kind of throw around. Like, what are you implying with that? Do you actually mean that there's a real problem here? Or do you just mean, you get a little bit over the top with how much you're appreciating this fire, how much you like it, how much you want to see it grow bigger, things like that. So to your point, Dr. Grande, it's not as prevalent as teenage boys would probably have it sound when you're in a setting like that.
Well, fire's, cool for sensation seekers, right?
I would say it's hot for sensation.
Hot. Yeah. It's cool and hot. But, that's something that's, young men tend to be more oriented toward excitement seeking for a time. Some retain it. And, fire is awesome. It's destructive and powerful. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're pyromaniac.
Mm-hmm. It's great for marshmallows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Has all kinds of uses. Some people like to stare at a fireplace. Doesn't mean they're,
Yeah, I do. I enjoy having a fireplace in my house and using it every once in a while. Mm-hmm. I love, like, on a cool autumn night, sitting outside around a fire is great. Just talking with, chit-chatting, shooting the breeze while the fire burns. It's great. Like, it's wonderful. It's a far cry from, having a visceral physiological reaction while I'm getting ready to start the fire and then feeling almost sexual gratification when the fire is burning and outrageous. Yeah.
So these terms like pyromaniac, you get thrown around. Another one that's thrown around a lot is kleptomania, which is completely different than people understand. They think like people want to steal, like shoplift for money, but that's contraindicated, right? It's people who shoplift and don't keep the items or don't care about the items. It's more trauma-based, actually. Kleptomania is fascinating. Maybe we'll cover it on an upcoming case. I don't know if I remember any cases that involve a kleptomaniac.
I don't know.
They're not actually associated with serious crime.
Yeah.
Sometimes kleptomaniacs return the items. They get the same thrill from putting them back.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of about getting away with it.
yeah, it's the excitement.
It's the excitement of
They don't use the stuff. They don't steal things they can even use. It's yeah.
It's like, how outrageous can I be before somebody figures out what I'm doing? Like, can I get out of the store with the washing machine under my shirt
and then bring it back in. Yeah.
and then bring it back in later, in my back pocket? Like, pretty sure people will notice you with a washing machine under your shirt. But yeah, people try and do all sorts of things, like pile as much clothes on top of themselves as they possibly can, and then kind of waddle out. See if the store detective notices. John Orr would have.
Mm-hmm. Oh, he would have. Yeah, he'd have pulled a gun on
He'd
him.
have been right there.
Yep.
He would have gotten them when they were even looking at like a price tag or something. Like, hey, don't do that. I see you're looking at this. I'm imagining what your motive is.
Yeah, klepto.
Right, you're klepto.
And my maniac senses are tingling. Pyromaniac in me is,
Mixing.
vibing with your kleptomania.
I think kleptomania and pyromania are both in is it impulse control, and it's a complex section of DSM. It's like impulse control, conduct disorder, or something like that. It's like three things that are, but yeah, it's part of that family. So like people think about it, it's all about impulses, not so much necessarily specifically fire or stealing, but that general pathology where people can't stop doing one particular thing. It excites them. Gambling is similar. Gambling disorder, yeah.
If we're going to put anything to these particular behaviors of John's, I would actually more liken it to a behavioral addiction.
Like a process addiction.
Like a process addiction rather than a pyromania. Because I don't necessarily think that he had this visceral excitement prior to starting the fires. I think his reaction was to seeing the fires and engage, and then the whole process, the whole thing, or the ritual of it, even up to coming in and saying, yes, this is arson, and getting the praise from people for solving his own crimes, or pointing out that it was a crime instead of, having people know that this was something that happened, is what kind of excited him and boosted him up. I think that was where the addiction lay. And then trying not to do that was hard for him. And it's a lot different from pyromania.
Yeah, I don't think anybody with pyromania or many would want to do something like take a risk to get caught like that. Like he was really working against himself to get extra gratification. I think the fire would be enough for somebody with pyromania.
Yeah.
But who knows? So let's look at final thoughts for John Orr before we move to the answering the comments. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, so with the book I read, like I said, it was written in part by his youngest daughter, Lori. So there's a few things in there that that she spoke to. Obviously we have the family connection there and perspective from the family that we may not have gotten, from other sources. So a few things that I wanted to note here. I might have said this originally, but when John left their family, his ex-wife, what's the ex-wife's name? The first wife. I've got it right here. Jody, first wife Jody. When John left Jody, she ended up not immediately getting married to him, but there was a guy named Jerry that she was seeing, and he moved in. And he requested to handle the discipline in the house. Like that was an actual request of his. And now, of course, it turns out he's verbally, physically abusive towards the family. And John never did anything about it. So John really didn't know about it, as far as the book said, as far as Lori knew, up until she was about 14. So this was a span of about 10 years or so that she was being abused by this stepfather. John maybe knew about it, but it wasn't really clear if he knew about it. But by the age of 14, he definitely knew about it, because Lori told his then girlfriend or wife, who made Lori tell John about it. So John was fully aware of it. And Lori expected, the police to come pretty soon, or for John to come and do something about Jerry. John never did. And I mean, if there's anything that's going to make your opinion of your father go down, you would think it would be that. But of course, this is all Lori knew, right? All she knew was abuse and this relationship with her stepfather. So that was a shame, of course, but that gives us another indication into John's mindset, that even his own daughter knew she was being horribly abused and didn't do anything about it. And just let that one go. So I had said that Lori believed John's innocence at first, and John had allowed her to attend 2 days of the trial, but he chose the days that she was allowed to attend. So this was potentially another way of John manipulating the situation, that she was only able to hear what was probably positive things about him. So in that way, Lori, of course, still believed in his innocence because he was manipulating that situation. He would also write letters to her, also manipulative. She would later show a therapist these letters, who would immediately say, you need to cut him off from your life. Nothing about this is positive. Nothing about this is healthy. And it's only going to cause you to, or contribute to you going into a further downward spiral. So even after he was convicted for all of this, John continued to be manipulative and show this more true side of him, even when it came to his daughter. So a few things that Lori would hear from family members after she started to realize that he really was guilty, that I thought were pretty telling. That he had admitted that he would light small brush fires, but not to worry. He controlled them to make sure they didn't hurt anyone. So he had actually admitted this to family members or somebody associated with the family, but they never did anything about it. So people knew he was setting fires, but they weren't necessarily connecting dots. And maybe that would have been difficult, but somebody knew about it at the very least. The family... other family members knew he was aggressive with his wives and his girlfriends. The family didn't get him professional help and kind of swept it all under the carpet. So again, there was prior knowledge of this, of something was wrong, but nobody did anything about it. Probably mainly because John put on such a good front to most of the world. He was very, maybe not very, but he was respected within his career field. So nobody, again, was really going to look into him because of what he was doing, kind of this front that he was putting on. And another family member had also said that the father sexually assaulted a younger relative when John was 12. So there's all these stories that come out kind of after the fact. We know there's a problem. We knew there was a problem. Many people knew there was a problem. We didn't do anything about it. Everything was swept under the rugs. So, and then the last thing I wanted to add, I don't have exact numbers of this, but I do remember hearing very similar things. The number of arson fires in and around Los Angeles County before John's arrest was in the hundreds. After his arrest, it dropped down to maybe a few or a dozen, something like that. So such a dramatic shift after he was arrested really, in my mind, spoke to his guilt a lot. I also saw that he was briefly represented by the Innocence Project, but I don't have any more information about that. That's the only thing they added in there. So there was, whether he got them to believe that he was innocent or got them to at least look into it, it doesn't sound like it was a long-term thing. So maybe they actually realized, okay, yes, we're not getting anywhere with this one.
I think the Innocent Project looks into a lot of cases,
Right.
and they'll take on representation in order to get a hold of the evidentiary files.
Right.
And once they look over those, they make their determination of whether they're going to pursue or not. And it sounds like they decided to drop their representation of him after they looked into the evidentiary stuff. So
Yeah, for good reason too.
yeah, for very good very good reasons.
It also said that he's been a model inmate, that he would teach classes, GED type classes, and he became, I might get the term wrong, but kind of like the head of the library in the prison, and they saw a reduction of books not coming back by like 70 or 80%. So all this effort that he makes to do the best that he could possibly do, he took that into prison as well.
I think the other inmates were afraid of being set on fire.
Probably. Don't give him any matches. Well, that's ironic because he's working in a library, something that like is a very flammable kind of place, But
he's
I'm
still,
glad he didn't have matches.
He's still pursuing that integrity, though,
Right.
like the shoplifting thing, like catching people. Like no one's getting a book out of this library without me getting it back.
Even these criminals, they're not doing it, right?
Right. I think that like he's never going to say he did it. He's never going to admit it. And he will do everything he can to be the model prisoner who does all of the right things because he's maintaining his innocence. He's not going to set any fires in there because if he did set a fire in there, it'd be proof that he's
right
where he needs to be. So he's not going to do that, which again speaks against the pyromania. Because it would be a necessity for him if it was really pyromania. I think it's just the manifestation of where the antisocial personality disorder came out. It's just the addiction that he's managed to kick at this point.
Is that what he was diagnosed with? Antisocial?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't remember that being in there.
Head,
I mean, it's certainly a possibility.
It fits. There's so many people. That's I don't want to step on your final.
No,
thoughts.
I'm done. So your turn. We've moved into your turn.
Okay. So the one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of people who have commented on have commented on how similar it is to serial killer cases, like the presentation of this, and especially with the fire setting being part of McDonald 3, like bedwetting, cruelty to animals, fire setting.
Right. Yeah, setting fires. Yeah.
But we don't even really have that much evidence that he did that as a child, early teenager.
We need more information.
We need more information about that time of his life. But it wouldn't surprise me if he didn't set very many fires at that age, because it doesn't seem to be the same kind of thing. But very often when we see the McDonald triad and we look at there's antisocial personality disorder involved here somewhere. So I wouldn't be surprised with John Orr if that was a thing. But the fire setting seemed to be more motivated by addiction or process addiction and what he got out of it, rather than pyromania. And the fact that he's not set any fires in prison, where arguably he could get a hold of matches, lighters.
Oh, he could. Yeah.
There's electric sockets, and as an arson investigator, he'd know how to do that to be able to do that if you really wanted to, but he hasn't.
He could even just get 2 sticks. Right?
Yeah. I mean, you can. Friction lighting is a thing.
Or a magnifying glass, if he has a window or whatever in his cell.
But when I first started looking at this case after you suggested it, I looked at the picture of John Orr that I see most frequently is his I think the fire captain picture. He's wearing the uniform, just big old mustache, and I'm just like, this dude.
Yeah.
We're looking into this dude. Like, we're gonna do this, and like it was kind of like, okay, so 4 people died. I mean, we've covered cases where only one person has died, and those are usually pretty intimate and pretty interesting. When we get into cases where multiple people die, we tend to look for something a little bit more fantastic, and we see much more in the way of numbers. I was unimpressed by that until I started hearing some of the numbers of how many fires he started, and then some of the other behaviors, the behind the bedroom doors behaviors, really were interesting. One of the ones I caught on Deadly Secrets, Investigation Discovery, Deadly Secrets did an episode on this. I don't remember. I kind of was a little phased out during this portion of the episode. One of his ex-wives was talking about how there's a period of time when someone was kind of stalking her. She never saw who it was, so she couldn't say that it was John. But it was like a shadowy figure that would show up in the front door and stand there. And it scared her to the point where she got a gun. I think she got a gun from John. And she was terrified because this silhouette standing in front of her door, knocking on the door at like 2 o'clock in the morning. She pulled the gun out and pointed and said, like, leave me alone. I will shoot you. Like, she was this close to pulling the trigger. And then the person walked away. And it seems likely that was John messing with her, because that was shortly after their marriage imploded. And it just, and like I said, I could be wrong about some of those details, but it's interesting I do remember that part where she was talking about holding the gun. She was in tears. She had tears streaming down her face, and she didn't remember doing that, or she didn't remember crying.
Right.
But she was terrified. He could have been a very terrifying person to a lot of people, and just did not get along well with his partners, did not get along well with most people, and was frankly just an odd person in many ways. But it became fascinating to look into like who this person really was.
Yeah, how much power he had and how he was able to set these fires over the course of so many years. Yeah. Like, there aren't a lot of arson investigators from one region. I think there's only one for each area. So if you're the arson investigator, as long as you stay in your area, which he didn't, but as long as you do, I mean,
he went on a lot of fire conferences.
Yeah, he set a lot of fires near conferences. He really took it literally, but I thought it was a fire conference.
I thought the fires were having a conference, and I was just trying to facilitate them meeting.
I was trying to boost attendance.
5 stores in one day. Wow. Jeff could have been taking attendance of the fires.
Have the fire sign in. They got to have some kind of certain signature for each of them, right?
Right, they just burn a little bit.
So what do we have as far as comments?
So 2 that we chose for today. First one is, what is Dr. Grande skilled in? As I love his content and would love to go down a similar career path as him. So, of course, we could broaden that, to all of us. What do we skip? But obviously, you have the most experience, highest degree out of the 3 of us.
Yes, so it's just a traditional counselor path, right? The same path that you 2 went down, except I added the PhD, but it's
and a few less shattered dreams,
and fewer shattered dreams, but yeah, it's traditional counseling path where you get an undergrad in whatever, mine's in psychology, but it doesn't have to be. You can do it with anything. We saw people with IT degrees come into master's programs. A master's in community counseling, which is now mental health counseling, was the same thing. And then a PhD in counselor education supervision. So the degree that, the leadership class of counselors that would train counselors, supervise counselors. I think it's an interesting route. It's different than social work, different than marriage and family therapy or psychology. All the major therapeutic brands are highly similar. I mean, there's it's 98% overlap, but the 2% that's different is interesting in counseling, the emphasis. But I'd like to hear your thoughts, because again, master's degree is the practitioner level degree.
Well, but before we get into that, one of the questions, like, what is your kind of specialization in therapy? Like, what kind of modality do you prefer when you were working with clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say I definitely had an emphasis toward cognitive behavioral therapy and existential counseling to some degree. But, like most counselors, you use Rogers the most, right? Person-centered. That takes up the most time. The CBT, you might use for 5-10 minutes in a session because you can't really do that for a whole session. It'll burn people up. No pun intended there with the... but yeah, it'll ignite the whole room. Yeah.
Are you sure? No pun intended. You got a book over there. That's fiction.
But yeah, I think in terms of population, I've worked with substance use populations, just like you did, Mike. I mean, I've worked with people who were the victims of terrible traumas, particularly sexual traumas. That was a major part of my career. And, really, in community mental health, as you know, you end up with everything. PTSD, OCD, GAD, bipolar, depression, schizophrenia, all types of personality disorders. Right? Like, all of them, sometimes seemingly at the same time, So you see a wide variety. And I think, that would be kind of somebody looking at this field, I would say, do some time in addiction and do some time in community mental health. And, a lot of times those are the same thing. But because if you think about it like I want to work with one population and that's it, you're not going to get the well-roundedness that you need. And community mental health will give it to you. You'll see crisis, you'll see non-crisis, you'll see, garden variety depression all the way up to very serious depression. You see it all. And I think it's a great education in a sense in those clinics. But yeah, tell me about your thoughts on it.
Well, I just wanted to say first, we have the advantage of knowing you well, Dr. Grande, and we know that you've done a lot of different things in your life, careers, jobs, and things like that. And so a lot of which, just from hearing you tell the story before, a lot of which played into ultimately, that you went into counseling, but you used a lot of those skills in other career areas or job areas as well. So, that's perhaps a story for another day. But for myself, throughout, I'm pretty sure elementary school, but definitely middle and high school and college, I was convinced that I was going to be a teacher. And that's what I wanted to do. So I went into undergrad for music education, and I lasted like a semester and a half. And I quickly realized that my level of musicianship was not what's required for college level, or teaching level for that matter. And how I even got into college for music is beyond me. I'm certain that the guy had pity on me because my audition was terrible. So that was a huge learning experience for me, for sure. So I had always had a love for literature and for books and writing as well. So I went into secondary English education after that, and that's what I ultimately graduated with. And so I did my student teaching. I did some of it abroad, over in Tanzania, over in East Africa. I was over there for 2 months, and it was great experiences. But through that, I also realized classroom education is not something that I really like that much, which of course you go through 4 years of college to come out with that result, and you're like, this is pretty frustrating. Like, here I thought this was what I was going to do. So I did some one-on-one stuff, like para-educator kind of stuff. And then from there, I ended up getting a job in Wilmington, here in Delaware, working with families who have, we call it DFS here, Division of Family Services, but what do they call it? Like child... CPS, Child Protective Services. So working with families that are involved with CPS or DFS here, ones that either their kids were removed from the home or still in the home, but we're working with them, real case planning kind of stuff. So I didn't have the right degree for it, for sure. But I had experience working with people in their homes in the like para-educator kind of thing, working with kids who had autism and behavioral problems, things like that. So I did that, and I worked with a lot of counselors in that job. And so I was going to people's houses, and I was like rose-colored glasses kind of thing, because here I am, city of Wilmington, doesn't have a great reputation for safety, right? But I didn't think anything of it. I'd go into people's houses and go through these shady kind of neighborhoods. And what did I know? I was just I had a job, and that's all I cared about. And so I worked with a lot of counselors and picked up a lot of things from them and realized, okay, this is more along the lines of what I'm suited for. So ended up, going into grad school same time that Mike did, and going from there. And so I worked in, so I guess you could call it community mental health, but it was a mobile therapist kind of thing, in-home counselor. So yeah, again, just seeing a wide variety of people and disorders and being kind of thrown into it, because you walk into someone's house, that's different than them walking into an office, because you're walking into their environment at that point. There could be any number of things going on in there, and often there were, right? Because these are also people who have DFS involvement and statistically really don't have the best coping skills to begin with as a result of that. So I did that for a while, and that was, I would say that was rewarding. That helped me to kind of build up that thick skin, to kind of accept whatever situation I'm literally walking into, and understand what skills are necessary to have to be able to go into a situation that's extremely uncertain, and work with people who their kids were recently taken or they're still in foster care or something, and understand the kind of anger that they're experiencing and be able to work with them still, even though they're experiencing that. So very different from many situations. So from there, I worked in a school, an alternative school, and it was another great experience. And from there brings me to my current I have a private practice that I started doing online therapy. So, I mean, that's a shameless plug for that. Anybody in Delaware, Pennsylvania, I'm available for that, for treatment. And I also work for a company that specifically does OCD treatment, and that's where I learned that and got that specialty. And so private practice, of course, is much different. I'm my own boss, of course, and that comes with its own stuff. And so it was an interesting progression, for sure. And I'm really glad I went down that path. And it definitely was not what I expected. That's not where I thought my life was going to turn out. But I'm really glad that I did, and I think there's a lot of... I think my personality lends itself to this career path, and I was thankful to have had the experiences that I had that brought me to this point.
Very good. Very good. By the way, the only kind of good plug is a shameless plug.
Well, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Maybe a drain plug. Or spark plug.
Or
That's right, spark plug. Yeah.
Spark plug's been good too.
To tie back to the fire reference. So what do you say, Mike?
Oh, skills. I have a very particular set of skills. My journey to becoming a counselor is a path full of broken dreams. It started with my first attempt at college. Right out of high school, I was going to be a chemical engineer. Like, that is a real story.
Not the running joke.
Not the running gag where we pick all these different weird things that have something to do with our case. No, my goal out of high school was to become a chemical engineer. I went to an engineering school, and there was one English class. And in an engineering school, it's mostly science-based stuff. Not a lot of writing required. Not a lot of English. Yeah, you might have to write some papers, but they're more technical in nature. So they did, but of course, for accreditations purposes, they have to have those basic courses. The one we had was called Great Ideas, and it was a 7-week course, and no 2 lectures were the same. So you couldn't miss a lecture. If you missed a lecture, you failed the course. And I remember one particular day I was in my chem lab, which was very important for chemical engineering major, and my lab partner didn't show up. We were doing titration stuff, which is a long, laborious process that I don't envy anyone having to do ever. But given that my partner wasn't there, I had to do both sides of a titration experiment, which made it take forever. And when I finally realized what time it was already halfway through my Great Ideas lecture, and I still had to break down everything before I could leave. And then I rushed over, and I got there 5 minutes before the end of the lecture, and I couldn't get any credit for that. So I failed that course. And being 18 years old and 500 and some odd miles away from home and no experience with higher education things whatsoever, I just kind of gave up. And knowing what I know now, I could have gone to the dean or, tried to withdraw from the course and get it set up for the next semester and things like that. But when I knew that I'd failed that, I was like, well, I've lost my scholarships. I've lost anything else. I'm done. And I just stopped going to any classes and just failed.
Especially right out of high school. That's,
right. Yeah. I spent the next 10 years rolling around through various retail positions. I've mentioned Blockbuster before. I was on their inventory team, which was going around doing physical inventories at different stores. I briefly worked for a retailer of secondhand merchandise, I suppose, a major national chain as well, known mostly by its initials. To the max. I worked for them as a store detective for a short period of time. And then I ended up, shortly after that, during a big economic downturn, 2008, 2009, I ended up unemployed and was struggling to get a job. I had management experience, but nobody wanted to hire managers from outside the company. Every place I turned was, well, you have management experience. I'm like, okay, I don't care. And they were still like, yeah, but we only hire managers from within. Like, but I'm not asking for a manager position. I'm just asking for the base lowest level. Like, you got a position here? I'll take the one that's down here. Like, that's what I will take. The lowest. Well, we don't think you'd be happy at the lowest level. I'm like, I'd be happy with a paycheck. Anything. Just bring me money. Like, I will take 5 cents right now and I'll be happy. Like, whatever. But I could not find a job. So I was like, I've got to find a way to make myself marketable. And I just went online and I was looking at college, returning to college, getting a degree in something. And I went to the University of Phoenix website and kind of put in feelers for how that went. And 5 minutes later, I got a phone call from a representative and they were like, what degree program do you think you're going into? I'm like, I don't know. What do you got? And they're like, well, we got this, we got psychology, we got this, we got this. I'm like, psychology sounds interesting. They're like, okay, great. And like before I was off of the phone an hour later, I was signed up for the first set of classes.
I thought you could say they faxed you a degree.
Like, no, it actually took me 3.5 years of doing it online. It actually worked out really well for me doing online school that way, asynchronous online school, because the horrible ADHD I had that I was not medicating at the time. And it helped me to gain some more confidence in myself, because after failing out of college, the prospect of going back to college was very daunting. Yeah. So I started seeing some positive effect on myself when I started seeing good grades, and I cruised through the rest of it. And then, near graduation time, I'm sitting there looking on my phone, like, what kind of job can I get with a bachelor's degree in psychology? Oh.
Yeah.
Nothing. It's like, well, I guess I'm going to have to get a higher degree. So I was like, you know what? I'll get a doctorate. That's what I'm going to do. And of course, I went over to the local university, University of Delaware. They were having a little gathering for their PhD program, which is in cognitive psychology. It's a PhD in cognitive psychology. And they were like, well, this is the stuff you need in order to get into this program. Like, you have your GREs, which are importance. Well, mostly on your application, we're looking for publications, looking for your research experience, or looking for this. I'm like, I don't have any of that crap. I went to online school. Like, should I even be sitting in this room right now? What the heck? I was like, you know what? I'm going to have to go to our master's degree. And I looked at local programs for master's programs. I found Wilmington University, which is where Jeff and I both went, and I applied. And fortunately, I was able to pass through the interview process and get in, and went from there. And learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about how to be a counselor, how to change this. I had always been a good listener. I was always that person that my friends turned to complain about their lives. And as my mom said, I had a collection of lame ducks. Like, just like every person who came into my life was just like had some sort of, issues, and I was the person they came to talk about. So it seemed natural, but it really was a major change to go through. And I had to challenge my own preconceptions and things going through that program. Working in drug and alcohol addiction was a major thing that I was terrified of when I first started the program. And thank you, by the way, for making me go to Eagleville for that, because that really changed and opened up my eyes to a lot of what it means to be a counselor. And then when I started working after graduation, started working in the field, it was like, how do I want to do a therapist? What kind of therapist do I want to be? And to be honest, like, I looked at like CBT. CBT is everything, everywhere. Like, it's the most popular way of doing therapy. And at the rehab that I was working at. They're like, make sure you give workbooks to everybody. Everybody comes, they have to have something to do during the day. Give them workbooks. And, here's a bunch of CBT based workbooks. Print these out and give them to people. And I'm like, wait, if that's CBT, I'm just like, a monkey can do that. Like a robot can just take your workbook, see cognitive behavioral therapy, do it. And
I think that's the future of counseling.
right. It is. But I found people don't do the homework.
No, they don't.
Like there were, I can count on one hand how many people in 2 years working in inpatient. I had over 300 clients. I gave every single one of them the same workbook. I can count on one hand how many times they turned it back into me.
Even people
Completed.
that eventually get better, like even people that are engaging, no one does the homework.
No one does homework. So it's like, I don't want to be a CBT guy. It's like, it's not me, not who I am. I want to be creative. I want to be expressive. I want to really engage in the existential side of things. And that's when I started looking into narrative therapy. And I went to England twice on the company dime too. Like, not exactly. They had one of the greatest programs. They would pay you for any training you did off, for the hours you were in training when you were off of campus. So if I had to go down to like Lower Delaware for a 4-hour training, they would pay me for the 4 hours. Which meant when I went overseas for a 40-hour training, I got paid for the full work week as if I was there.
Nice.
Which was great. Loved that.
But you have to pay for the.
But I had to pay for pay for the ticket myself. I had to pay for the hotel stay and pay for the training myself. But I didn't. But my big problem would have been I don't have a week's vacation to go do that. Mm-hmm. But I didn't need a week's vacation. They paid me, which was great. So I went over to England in 2018 to learn narrative therapy. I went back for level 2 training in 2019. If it hadn't been for COVID, I'd have gone back in 2020 for a level 3 training. That one would have been focusing in supervision, providing supervision to other counselors through a narrative framework.
Like a master narrative therapist.
Right. Yeah. Which would have been phenomenal. And I still want to take that training. They have like 6 level 3 modules that I want to get through.
Wow.
Unfortunately, I'll never be able to get their diploma because that requires taking a semester in Australia at Dulwich University, and I can't. I can't do that.
That's a big commitment.
It's a huge commitment. I don't think I'll ever do that, but I've always wanted to utilize. It is a very creative way of doing therapy, externalizing things, taking a problem issue outside of the self, trying to find meaning and value. And I find that when I give homework to people, they actually do it. Because my homework is usually like, this important value that's really important to you that you haven't done in a while, do that.
Much more meaningful than this workbook.
Absolutely. Much, much more meaningful. It's like, oh, wow, you're the biggest, most meaningful thing in your life right now would be connecting with your wife. Your homework is to go connect with your wife. Right. And
light bulb moment.
So,
wait, that's a great idea.
Maybe I should do that. It's like, okay, you're going to do it anyway. Like you really want to do this. Here's how. Mm-hmm. And then they come back and be like, I did the thing. And it felt so much better. I'm like, great. Let's figure out other ways to do that.
Yeah.
And like, that's how I got to be where I am, and trying to continue to try and find ways to use my creativity and my drive and just the passion I have for helping other people to find that. I learned a long time ago, I don't help others. I just help others find insight into themselves.
Help guide or something like that. Yeah.
I think it might be racist to say Sherpa, but it's kind of like that's the role, right? Mm-hmm. They're the mountain climber. I'm just carrying their equipment and going, no, that way, not that way.
Mm-hmm. Remember the Simpsons with the
yeah, the 2 Sherpas taking Homer up the mountain.
They look out the window and all of a sudden there's this mountain that wasn't there, and
the murder horn.
They play on the Matterhorn from Disneyland, but yeah.
Oh my goodness! Speaking of the Simpsons, I had to laugh hard the other day. The last video that we did before this was LuLaRoe, right? I don't know if that'll be up on YouTube before this one is, but
it's done. It's someday it will be.
But it's done. It's done. Like, so LuLaRoe, of course, is a multi-level marketing program, and the most recent episode of The Simpsons, they revealed that Homer fell prey to a multi-level marketing program.
I just saw that
with the knives.
And then he had boxes of knives in the garage.
Boxes
and
of
he tried to
knives
set
in
him on fire when and Marge tackled him. And he was like throwing him on the ceiling.
That's so funny. I had to laugh about that. Like I was like, oh my goodness, that's funny because we just did the thing. You know, Simpsons did it.
It was all about scams, right?
Oh, yeah,
The whole
it was all about
episode was
scams,
about,
yeah.
It was really
That's
actually
incredible.
all the different scams that the family fell for, like Abe Simpson and Marge. It was hysterical. Like it was so connected to what happens.
Yeah.
It was just so well researched. Yeah.
Some of my other past stuff. I worked at movie theaters, of course, Blockbuster and things like that, which is where I found my love for movies. And at one point in my life, after wanting to be a chemical engineer, I'd wanted to be a film director.
Yeah.
That was another thing. Like I just never bothered to push myself to go in that direction. I was just like, I'm going to be a film director someday. How are you doing that? I don't know. I'm going to go work.
I'm going to put the film with the director.
So it was like, if only I could get enough money to buy that camera, I'll start. And now I've got a camera 10 times better than the camera I could have gotten way back then, right, on my phone. And I still don't make movies with it.
Artsy professions are tough because you can go a long time without making any money.
Yeah.
You know, like you'll talk to somebody who's like, I want to be a documentarian. Like, oh, what you been working on? I've been working on a documentary about, whatever. How long? Oh, 10, 11 years. You make any money? Well, no, you only make the money when you finish. It's just very spongy and soft. Like, what?
Yeah.
It doesn't have a concrete career path like other professions. Art-based professions are. I kind of feel sorry for artists. There's like a meme, right? The starving artist.
Right.
Yeah. It's not far from the truth.
Although I don't think that counselors are all that concrete either.
No. This profession is very artistic. More artistic than we want to believe in reality, like the way it's applied.
Right.
The way it's researched is pretty good, but it doesn't convert well into practice. Yeah.
A lot of variables.
So many variables.
Yeah. Yeah, many fields you see like fire science. I'm sure they do research and studies and experiments, and that is taught to like the investigators. Makes sense.
I think some of the problem though with fire science is that it's similar to like blood spatter analysis.
Yeah, very fuzzy.
Very, very fuzzy science. I mean, the physics of it is there, but the physics can explain some, but the random chaos of just moving air changes the nature of a fire.
Yeah. And there's a big push to solve those crimes. So like fantasy creeps in, or just like it does in forensic science. With, they find DNA matches and fingerprint matches that, very speculative. But still, I mean, the theory is that the research in any field will actually matter and express in the practitioner level. And that doesn't happen in mental health anywhere. Not any profession of mental health.
Most of the research-based stuff I read is interesting. It does give me a basis for working on things, but I don't go like, oh, wow, this article is going to change everything. No, it's like, oh, wow, that's neat. And then like 6 months later, I'm like, I remember in an article, I could apply this right now.
Yeah.
And then I can apply that. But it's based on evidence, but it's not all there.
Yeah, well, I think, too, that just practitioners are so busy that they don't think to go back and do what you're doing, which is to read articles and put them in the bank, and then they'll be useful someday. Instead, it just becomes a job.
Oh, half the time I read articles because I'm arguing on Facebook. Somebody says something, I'm like, I've got to know, and I've got to be able to prove that I'm right on this, so I'm going to go read some articles, and then I come back and...
My system is whatever I read and I want to apply it, usually gets written down on like an index card, and it's right in front of the keyboard, like between the keyboard and the monitor. So I have this array of index cards. Some of them are like notes to myself, but some of them are also like things I need to remember to do. But some of them are also, oh, I remembered this, or a quote from something, whatever. And so like they kind of pile up, and then eventually kind of sort through them, and I'm like, oh yeah, and it might be 6 months later. Might be a few weeks later, might be a few days later, but eventually I'm like, oh, I remember that. And then maybe it'll be a little bit more solidified, into practice. But it's, you're right, Mike. There's not really a surefire way to, do that, especially with being busy or with not realizing the gravity of perhaps what you're reading at that moment.
It's funny you said you put the cards between the monitor and the keyboard and everything, and that reminded me of an acronym my mom used to tell me. She's huge in the computer programming industry and database stuff, and it's PEBCAC. Problem exists between chair and keyboard.
That's pretty good.
I love it. She loves that one. She'll bring that one out every once in a while. It's funny, but you're like, yeah, it's between the monitor and the keyboard. I'm like, oh my goodness, PEBCAC. I've got to remember that.
Well, there are problems there. I'll tell you that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So let's move to, I think we have one more comment,
one more.
right? I think this one's a little not as counseling oriented.
Not at all. Not at all. Well, yeah. What is one of your favorite foods, and is cheesesteak one of them? So what's your favorite food, and why is it cheesesteak? Is essentially...
I see an emphasis here on cheesesteak. So what do you think, Jeff?
So I grew up, my mom's side of the family is from Philadelphia and in Delaware. You know, we're pretty close to Philadelphia, about 45 minutes or so. So it was certainly we don't consider ourselves part of Philadelphia region or anything, but we're pretty close.
We're part of the Philadelphia region.
Okay, Mike considers himself.
I think Delaware is a suburb of Philadelphia.
Whether we want to think of ourselves that way or not, we kind of are.
Well, it is certainly the nearest major city. We have Wilmington, but don't consider that necessarily a major city. So my mom's side of the family is from there. My dad worked with a lot of people in Delaware County and were from Philadelphia. So we didn't spend a lot of time there, but there was always this thing of like, where do you get your cheesesteak from? Pat's or Geno's, right, in Philadelphia. And where do you get your cannolis from? What bakery do you get it from in Philadelphia? But we didn't spend a lot of time in Philadelphia. So it was kind of like, what are we doing here? But it was just all these people my parents knew. So started off, this means something to a lot of people, but to people outside of the Philadelphia region, it's going to be like, what in the world are you talking about? But this is meaningful to a lot of people because it's a big deal in the Philadelphia region. My dad would always tell us that, he taught us how to order from Pat's Steaks in Philadelphia. And that's a big deal because, I'm exaggerating, but you'll get killed if you don't know how to order the right way.
No steak for you.
And so we would always go to Pat's. And then I grew up, I was like, I wonder what Geno's is like. So I tried Geno's and I was like, all right, so they're a little bit different, but I understand there's rivalry, whatever. So then I tried a place called Tony Luke's and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I even doing with my life? So then, Tony Luke's was the thing. And it's a big deal, right? So cheesesteaks are great, and I agree with you. I agree with this person. One of my favorites for sure. But then actually this has to do with grad school, but I became a vegetarian. So then cheesesteaks were out of the picture. And the reason it has to do with grad school is because we took an addictions class and we had to give up something for the addictions class. And at the time I was traveling a lot for work, and I realized that I was eating out at fast food like way too much just because it was convenient, right? I was driving anyway. So I was like, okay, well, I could say I'm going to give up fast food, but that might not be practical because I'm driving a lot. So I'm like, all right, well, it's easy for me to just get a burger and just whatever. So I'm going to give up eating meat. So I did for a couple months or whatever. And then at some point after that, became vegetarian. And so it's a good time to be a vegetarian. There's a lot of really good alternatives. And so cheesesteaks are possible now, being a vegetarian. So that's great. Still one of my favorites for sure. But I would say that a favorite food of mine is just pizza. I could eat way too much of it for sure, and I never grow tired of it. In a similar category of things I don't grow tired of is just peanut butter and jelly. And I'm totally fine with that, like just having it regularly. And I'm pretty simple like that, I guess. Not real creative in that way. It doesn't really matter to me. I'm okay sticking with things that I like, right? But my wife, for example, really good at cooking, is definitely not okay with having the same thing over and over again, right? So I see when we got married, I see this different side of things. I'm like, okay, so people like want to eat many different things, like they want to take the time to cook something just because it's different. Wow, this is mind blowing, right? So I just not real picky with what I eat, but so I'm okay with I don't know if they would call them comfort foods or not, but like I'm okay with things that just taste good, and I'm not real picky with it.
Very good. Very good. So what do you think, Mike?
Oh, I can make a whole bunch of self-deprecating jokes about, well, look at me. I love all sorts of foods that I love. I know I'm a very, very large person, mostly because of very sedentary lifestyle, but I do like cheesesteaks. Cheesesteaks are great. Pizza's awesome. But I have to say, honestly, my absolute favorite food is whatever food I'm just cooking and providing to other people. I really do enjoy when people like the food that I have cooked.
Nice.
I have two pellet smokers in my backyard. I love to make a good brisket. I've talked about my barbecue sauce before. Somebody said I should bottle it and sell it overseas. I'm like, I would, but I don't actually have access to a kitchen that isn't populated by animals. So can't get it FDA approved for sale. But I like to make all sorts of different recipes for other people to enjoy. One of the favorites that I have is chicken and dumplings. I'll brine and smoke a whole chicken. And then make dumplings using like quartered canned biscuits. You get Pillsbury biscuits, just pop open the can and just quarter them and throw them into some chicken soup. And they plump up and just make a gravy out of the soup. It comes out pretty good. And everybody who I give it to really likes it. It's based on my mom's recipe, but I had a little bit of extra to it.
A little bit of love, extra love in there.
I do, yeah. Plus flavor. Probably shouldn't say that because my mom might see this at some point, but I just do things a little bit differently from the way my mom does them, and but I love most of her recipes. I grew up with them, of course, and just put my own spin on them. But I like to provide food to others. And yeah, cheesesteaks are great. I don't have any, any stories about like going to different restaurants to pick out the cheesesteaks. I usually just get them from local places. But I do say I have a horror story about a cheesesteak. I will never order one in California ever again. Oof. Back in 2001, I ordered a cheesesteak and came out with this, like, first of all, it was a Kaiser roll. It's the wrong type of roll for you get an Amoroso roll, like a real like sub roll for a cheesesteak. And the other problem was it wasn't like chipped steak, which is what it's supposed to be. It was actually like chunks of like ribeye steak. I was like, what is this? Like, it's a cheesesteak. I'm like, no, it's got steak, it's got cheese, but it's not a cheesesteak.
That's what I'm saying. Real particular in this region. Right.
It is like, I don't know, you could say cheesecake and be like, okay, well, there's American cheese on this chocolate cake. It's a cheesecake. Like, no, it's not the same. Like, it's not the same. Okay, over to you.
Yes, so I do like cheesesteaks. I've had quite a few of them. I like pretty much any meat products. Like when I think about dinner, it's either a meat product dinner or not. But I could never be a vegetarian. I wouldn't last like 6 hours.
I used to say that too.
I'm a meatitarian.
Yeah. Yeah, I like, pretty much anything comes from, chicken, pig, cow, big fan of the meat products. I would say, I'd have to go with pizza as number one. Pepperoni pizza sometimes, other times sausage pizza. I don't like to mix the pepperoni and the sausage. Sometimes I do, but that wouldn't be my favorite. Yeah, pretty much it. Pizza, yeah. I do like cheesesteak. And like a lot of other things, again, like chicken, pork, sausage, whatever.
Pizza is a pretty versatile.
Yeah, you can put lots of stuff on it.
You could have a cheesesteak pizza.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are places that make that around here.
I know that this is an unpopular opinion, and I'm okay with with preferring something that's not popular, but I like Hawaiian pizza. Now, of course, I already said
I don't think we can do this together anymore.
That's a typical response. Now I know that I don't eat meat, so what I prefer now is sweet peppers and pineapple on the pizza, and I think it's fantastic. Like, I think it's really good. Again, unpopular opinion. You can hate me all you want in the comments. Totally okay with that. I'm still gonna like it. I'm still gonna enjoy it, and there's nothing you can do about it. So.
I'm not gonna try and do anything about it. My only thing is, like, I don't like warm pineapple.
Sure, I understand that.
Like I don't like it, like pineapple upside down cake just out of the oven. People are like, oh, that's great. I'm like, no, don't like. I don't want.
I can understand that.
The warm pineapple, the hot pineapple, I don't like it. Like, it's too acidic to me at that point.
Warm fruit in general. Fruit's cold. Right. That's that's how you eat fruit usually.
I understand what you're saying.
Give me a
Totally,
cold pineapple.
totally understand it.
Cold pineapple or like a cold can of pineapple.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I love that, but that's why I don't like it on pizzas because it gets warm. Yeah. I don't like it.
Right. I understand.
Cold strawberries. Yeah, but not flaming strawberries.
No. No.
Yeah.
Although I do like cold strawberry with like warm chocolate, like on the chocolate fountain. Like that's actually pretty good. But the fruit is still cold and gives you a nice temperature differential between them. Yeah.
Now, I don't think that fruit and chocolate should ever be mixed. Ever. Like, not a fan of it at all. That conflicts to me, and I like fruit. and chocolate is good, but it's not something I go to a lot. So, like, mixing them, that's, like, terrible to me. Like, it just feels, I can feel how terrible that is.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. And again, unpopular opinion, I'm totally okay with it. Say whatever you want. I'm still going to hate it. And I'm okay with that.
So real quick, I'm just curious on the food thing. What about favorite like candy bar?
So candy bar, I would have to say like Butterfinger or Milky Way, one of the two. Okay. But I'm definitely gummies are my thing. So like I'd prefer gummies over a candy bar any day. So like sour like gummy worms, gummy bears, whatever. You name it, I'm cool with it.
Any gummy product.
Any gummy
product. I like meat products, you like gummy products.
Right. Which unfortunately there's gelatin in a lot of gummy products, most of them, and that's derived from meat, of course. So sucks to prefer gummy products as a vegetarian because
there are some ways of making gummy products without the gelatin.
Fruit pectin,
using a fruit pectin, which is more vegetarian based, but it's still not the same.
No,
it's not the same as a gummy bear. Like that, it's just not the same.
It's a different consistency. So whatever, there's some sacrifice. No big deal. It's just candy, but at the same time, it's candy. So
yeah, it is a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Mike,
right Twix. That's a hard line. Right Twix. Don't get me a left one. I send my girlfriend in the store. She's like, "Do you want a candy bar?" I'm like, "Yeah, give me a Twix." If she comes out with a left Twix, I'm gonna be mad. I know reasonably there is literally no difference between them. It's just an advertising thing, but it's something I started a long time ago when they first started advertising the difference between right and left. And I was like, I picked a line. And I'm like, right. That's it. I picked a line, and I'm sticking with it. Twix is just one of my favorites in general.
Yeah,
I like
pretty
Twix. It's like I'm not going to throw out a left Twix, but I'll just shake my fist and like, how dare you get the left Twix? Right Twix is better. They cascade the chocolate over instead of drizzling it.
It's like straight out of the commercial.
Right, yeah. It's just a fun little thing. But yeah, Twix is one of my favorites. After that, I think Baby Ruth. After that. Yeah.
How about you, Dr. Grande?
I would probably have to go with Snickers. Yeah, but there's some other kind of quasi candy bar products I like Kit Kat. Really like Kit Kat. Yeah. And Rolos.
Rollers are great.
Big fan of Rolos. Yeah. And not all caramel products, but there's something about Rolos that, yeah.
They have a good, like the amount of chocolate versus caramel is it's good. It's a good mix there.
Yeah, and it's a compact package. It's always the same.
See, I don't know if our viewers at home noticed that there's a distinct difference. Dr. Grande said caramel, and Jeff said caramel.
He did.
It's an interesting question. For our people in the audience, which is the correct pronunciation?
I grew up with caramel, but then was like, I really prefer caramel. So I made the intentional switch. Just like I grew up saying water, my family being from the Delaware County region, and that being like a WOODER, water. But I had to be very intentional about, no, I'm going to say water because A, I'm not even from that area really. I was born there, but not really even from that area, and B, that's not how it's spelled. So I'm changing it.
Give me a glass of water.
Right, exactly. Yeah. My 3-year-old son has picked up on that difference. He started saying water. I said, "Why are you saying water?" He said, "Well, that's pop up in G. That's how they say it. That's how his grandparents say it." So even at young ages, they can pick up on these things like quickly.
Regional dialect stuff.
Yeah, right.
Well, I know in Scranton they say radiator. And they have a lot of them because a lot of the older houses, it's radiator heat. Of course, we say radiator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Radiate that heat.
Those things are scary.
What's interesting, though, is when they say radiate, it's not radiate. It's just a radiator that radiates heat.
Yeah. Yeah, those things get pretty hot.
Yeah, well.
But that was, for many years, that's what they had. Yeah. All right. So on that note, we'll wrap up this video about John Orr.
I did want to mention, I do have our new figurine over by the grave on Jeff's desk is our Nosferatu. That was in honor of our vampire friend,
Rod Farrell.
You guys voted. That's what I saw the most votes for was the Nosferatu. So there it is. And I'll have another one on our next episode. It's already printed. I'm not going to reveal what it is until that episode.
Jeff, want to pick it up and maybe kind of hold it? Now your microphone might be able to get a shot of it.
Pretty good.
Yeah, it is pretty good.
And this, it's really small, like relatively small, right? So the amount of detail that you put, like the paint work that you had to do on here is incredible now that I'm actually looking at it. So like there's buttons on there, so that's a different color. There's a different shade between like the collar and the rest of the jacket, and even the hem on the bottom is a slightly different color. So like a lot of detail on this. You may not be able to see, but in person, like pretty incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
So do you have some thoughts for next one?
Oh, for John Orr, I could do. We've already got flames on the table here, so we could do a fire hat. Fire hat for that.
You do a match or matchbook, perhaps, or something like that.
I could do a matchbook, something like that,
or white or yellow lined paper, maybe, or something like that.
I could try and recreate the incendiary device.
That's true. That would be impressive.
Add some smoke to it as well. Like I could try and 3D print the smoke. Ooh. Add that on there. Okay, so incendiary device or fire hat. That's what we'll go with.
So that's the vote, right? So for one or the other. Very good. So we'll read those comments and kind of see what gets the most votes for that. But very good. Thanks, Mike, for that. Always interesting with the various objects that are all these connected to something to do with stories that we have covered. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you got to think a bit to figure them out.
Yeah.
Right? They're subtle, just like the the board. Yeah.
The murder board.
So we'll wrap up there with John Orr. Again, please put any comments in the comment section. We read all of them. If you have ideas for other videos, for murder part, for movie part, for alien, lizard, humanoids, we'll look at that, and we track that and try to pick different stories, different topics that people are interested in. So again, please put any thoughts in the comment sections. We read every comment. Any ideas for future episodes, we'll definitely look at that. We always consider those when selecting topics. We appreciate you watching, and we'll talk to you soon.